Who's in charge? Is there a God, or are we on our own? In the Western world, this image of God reaching out a divine finger to transfer the spark of life into Adam's waiting hand has shaped our mental picture of divinity. Here are man and God looking more alike than different, ready to touch in an intimate act of creation. Man, and it does seem to be man, not woman, is about to receive a spark of the divine life. Depending on your point of view, this image may be comforting, challenging, excluding, or excessively anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphism means putting something that is not human into human shape or form. Treating a doll as if she's alive, imagining Bambi has human emotions, casting God in human form. All these are examples of anthropomorphism. If you're a white Italian male of a certain age, you may be very comfortable with a God who looks enough like you to be credible. But what if you're an African woman, a Vietnamese child, a Native American elder? Will this image of God speak to you? Another challenge is the variety of ways of honoring God that come from differing images and cultural traditions. Raised in one, but at home in another, we may face the challenge of honoring our parents in their own tradition, now different from our own, as Hilary Tom explains.
Since I now have a different faith, what do I do when my parents do die and decide, how I'm going to make sure that they get their needs fulfilled in their religion? So I wrote a poem called Dayenu, which is Hebrew for "It will be enough." When I die, my children will say Kaddish for me, and that with pine wood box and linen shroud will be enough. In time, I will say Kaddish for my parents. It will not be enough. They believe in hell's yellow emperor, fret about food, shelter for their ghosts. The magnification of an alien God's name would send them into the afterlife, barefoot, ghosts on hard dirt streets, banging tin cups on red doors. They would drink bitter tea, lie alongside ghosts with unopened wombs. So I have promised my mother I will burn a paper mansion with puppet servants, chests of paper gold, paper shells of cars. My brothers will provide oolong tea and chicken rice each feast day, the monthly stipend of hell money, shells of faith. These we render to our mother who tied red thread on our feet and fingers as we slid from her womb to bind us to life. We hold this end of the scarlet thread our parents unravel. As they near the yellow springs, feel it tighten as the wind blowing off the river lodges dust in our eyes.
Our ways of worshiping God are different and personal, often closely reflective of how we see ourselves and our own needs. It's difficult, if not impossible, to image God in other than human terms. That's the way we think, after all. And yet, everything theologians tell us about God suggests that God is too vast and complex to be captured in anything as narrow and confining as human form. Yet, because we seem to need to give God a face, we have a whole set of cultural images that imply God is old and white and male. Here's a story to test your own mental pictures. An astronaut claimed to have seen God, but declined to speak about his experience until he was back on Earth. At the news conference, reporters could hardly contain their excitement. Finally, one blurted out, "Come on, what's he like?" "Well," said the astronaut, taking a deep breath, "first of all, she's black." Don't censor your immediate reaction. Are you surprised? Thrilled? Disgusted? Incredulous? Secretly pleased? If you're a white male, there may be an unexpected jolt. God, black, and female? Never. African Americans and women may be equally surprised, but secretly pleased to hear God described in terms that more closely resemble themselves. although each may still find ingredients in this new image shocking. The truth is that God, if there is a God, is just as accurately or inaccurately described by the astronaut's words and by Michelangelo. Neither is truer than the other. Each is a necessary distortion. But the Sistine Chapel is so much more familiar to most of us. Notice, too, that how we image God has a lot to do with how we image human power relationships. If God is white and male, it's necessary and proper for white males to hold power positions in human society and in human families. Questions about God are intimately connected with questions of human nature. Wars and brutal dictatorships often justify their power by asserting divine sanction or by radically dehumanizing those who must be killed or suppressed. Witnessing to these distortions may be the most human thing any of us can do, according to Carolyn Forche.
Well, what is a poet of witness, and can you give me an example of a poet of witness? I chose to tell the story of Miklos Radnoti. Miklos Radnoti was the foremost Hungarian poet of his generation, and in 1942 he was arrested by the Germans and forced marched to Yugoslavia, where he spent 2 years in a military labor camp. In 1944, the Germans realized that they were losing the war and for some reason decided to force march these laborers back into Hungary. They force marched some 3,000 laborers, and only 22 survived the march. Among them, the poet Miklos Radnoti. When they got into Hungary, they tried to, the remaining soldiers who had accompanied the marchers tried to put the marchers in a hospital across the Hungarian line, and the hospital personnel were frightened, and they said, "We have no room, we're full, go away, leave us alone." So the soldiers wanted to get rid of these prisoners and essentially get back to their units. So they took these prisoners to the forest, where they were executed and buried in a mass grave. 2 years after the war, Miklos Radnoti's widow, Fanny Radnoti, who is still alive to my knowledge, went to the site of the mass grave with fellow villagers, and they exhumed the grave site. They took out these 22 bodies, and she went from corpse to corpse until she found the corpse that she identified as her husband's. And she went through his clothing, and from the pocket of one of his pockets, she pulled a small notebook, and she peeled apart the pages and dried them in the sun. This notebook came to be called the Borscht Notebook, which contains the last poems that Miklos Radnoti wrote, and they were written while on this march. And I explained to the publishers at Norton that these were the poems I wanted to include among those in this anthology, and that's how I was envisioning this idea of the poet of witness, and somehow I think they were moved by the story.
Atrocities make some people wonder, where was God while all this was going on? Materialists insist everything can be explained or accounted for without bringing God into the picture. We humans are to blame for what we do to each other. Atheists, such as the existentialists we discussed in a previous lesson, usually argue from a naturalistic or materialist view of reality that has no room for a supreme being and does not require one. Agnostics say it's impossible to know whether or not there's a God. Theists believe in God. If we take theism as a point of departure, the really interesting question is, what kind of God do you believe in? Deists describe a kind of first cause that got everything started and then politely stepped off stage. Pantheists say God is fully expressed in nature or the material world. God is in the storm, the gentle breeze, the flower, the bird song, and not apart from these things. To believe in this kind of God probably has little spillover into other areas of your life. The God that theists believe in is personal and has some kind of ongoing relationship with human beings. A theistic God expects things of us and has rules for living that must be followed. When we talk about a theistic God, the question of anthropomorphism becomes especially important. There are two ways to prove the existence of God, one based on reason, the other based on intuition. Of course, there's also the way of faith, but this is the province of religion rather than philosophy. As poet Lee Young Lee points out, faith and art may be closely related. Both prayer and the creative process expand our scope of vision and intensify our focus.
I think the condition of prayer is is a state wherein we have a kind of focus, and yet we have a very wide peripheral attention. And somehow it seems to me that the good poems are enact that kind of condition, where we are very focused, very concentrated on the one hand, and on the other hand we have a very wide periphery.
An intuitive understanding of God attained through prayer is quite different from a logical proof for the existence of God. However, some Western thinkers have been convinced that human reason alone, unaided by faith, could prove God's existence. Anselm of Canterbury in the 11th century reasoned that if he could imagine a perfect God, and he could, that perfect God must exist. Otherwise, the perfect God would lack something, namely existence, and cease being perfect. Part of what it means to be God, according to this ontological argument, includes existence. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century used Aristotle's arguments from the world and arrived at a first mover, a necessary being, an uncaused cause, and labeled it God. According to these cosmological arguments, the cosmos itself proves its creator. Teleological arguments from Aquinas and others find the order and purpose in the world implies a world maker, in the same way the existence of a watch implies a watchmaker. The other way to prove the existence of God involves intuition. In order to have an experience of God, one must cultivate a spirit of waiting, very similar to the focused state achieved in meditation. If God is immanent in the world, right here in all its processes and in us, rather than transcendent, far away and in another mode of being, then the extraordinary is always just a heartbeat away. Some people have had direct personal encounters with a being they call God. It's not a matter of reason, they say, but rather of direct, intimate experience. One of these was Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century abbess who had visions of light, moments of mystical union in which she believed God spoke to her. So convinced was she that sometimes she defied direct orders from her bishop in order to be faithful to her revelation from God. Mechtild of Magdeburg, a 13th century German mystic, calls God her most beloved and describes herself as God's fiancée. There are mystics in all religious traditions, women and men who have overwhelming, life-changing encounters with the holy that mark them for the rest of their lives. And there's something of mysticism in this lovely poem, inspired by a grave marker poet Lucille Clifton saw and wondered about.
I saw carved on a gravestone in the South, "Here lies our Sarah, bride of Christ." And it was a Protestant church. Now, I could have understood if it had been a Catholic church, but I tried to imagine myself into the people who carved this. And I also sometimes try to turn the ecstasy of religion and the erotic ecstasy, which I think are something alike, into a poem. And so finally, after a couple of years, here is the poem, carved on a gravestone in a Southern Baptist churchyard. Here lies our Sarah, bride of Christ, who opened herself to him, holding her body a bed, until he came completely into her, and she rose in a fever of ecstasy and ran, our good, clean girl, our Sarah, away from our tears, away forever from our narrow, Protestant arms.
Death is seen here as an ecstatic experience of union with God. For most of us, cultural images of God will shape our thoughts, whether we're theists or not. Picturing God in exclusively male terms has made some of us feel more included and others more excluded from full humanity. Paintings of a blonde, blue-eyed Virgin Mary cement the idea that the Holy Family resembles the human family of the artist and ignore the Middle Eastern genes of the Mother of Jesus. One of the ways out of this impasse is to paint and sculpt and describe God to include ourselves. An Asian, African American, or Native American God is as close to and as far from reality as the Italian one Michelangelo painted. When Mary Baker Eddy, founder of Christian Science, called God our Father, our Mother, she followed the second path, including both genders rather than substituting one for the other. If we're going to accept the human need to image God using our own characteristics, it might be better to be inclusionary rather than exclusionary. As we've learned, relying on a two-male image of God led the Christian Church to debate whether women actually had souls. Even today, the Roman Catholic Church permits only men to be ordained as priests, in large part because of an identification of male elements with deity. The same kinds of things can be said about imaging God as white. A black God is no more or less accurate than a white one, but the existence of stereotypes and prejudice associated with blackness cause a black God to jar us into attention. Visual and poetic images also show an old deity, often one with a long flowing beard. What about a young athletic God, a child, or a teenager? What kinds of things are we communicating about God by the paintings we paint and the words we use? Apart from the controversial issues of race, gender, and age, there are many other characteristics typically associated with God in the Western world. God is said to be eternal, omnipotent or all-powerful, omniscient or all-knowing, and good. The 19th century philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche shocked the world by having a madman in one of his works run into the marketplace and declare, "God is dead." What he meant was that God no longer had power or meaning in the lives of many people. Yet the phrase retains its power to shock. If God is not eternal, the name itself seems to have no meaning. We tend to think of God existing before time, bringing the world into being out of nothing, and continuing to exist even if we succeed in blowing ourselves up or destroying our planet. Similarly, God is usually described as omnipotent. Here's a riddle. Can God create a rock so big God can't lift it? Either answer seems to threaten the omnipotence of God. If God can't accomplish the rock-making task, that's a limit on God's power. And if God can create the rock but not lift it, that also seems to limit omnipotence. Thomas Aquinas supplied the theological solution to this apparent stumper. God can do everything that's possible, everything that doesn't involve contradiction. To say that God can't create an unliftable rock is a limitation on logic, not a limitation on omnipotence. There are many kinds of power, of course. Poet Roland Flint muses on the kind of power it must have taken for Jesus, whom Christians call God's Son, to call fishermen from work that had defined their lives. That kind of power, Flint thinks, is more alluring than miracles.
It's called Follow. Now here's this man mending his nets after a long day, his fingers nicked here and there by ropes and hooks, pain like tomorrow in the small of his back, his feet blue with his name, stinking of baits, his mind on a beer and supper, nothing else. A man who describes the settled shape of his life every time his hands make and snug a perfect knot. I want to understand, if only for the story, how a man like this, a man like my father in Harvest, like Bunk McVeigh in The Stench of Lobstering, or a teamster, a steel worker, how an ordinary working stiff, even a high-tempered one, could just be called away. It's only in one account he first brings in a netful. In all the others he just calls, they return the look or stare, and then they straightway leave their nets to follow. That's all there is. You have to figure what was in that call, that look. And I wouldn't try it on a tired working man unless I was God's son. He'd kick your ass right off the pier. If they had been vagrants, poets, or minstrels, I'd understand that, men who would follow a different dog. But how does a man whose movement day after day after day absolutely trusts the shape it fills, put everything down and walk away? I'd pass up all the fancy stunting with Lazarus and the lepers to see that one.
The power to inspire a life change may seem less dramatic than the power to raise the dead, but we know how strong a power must be to make even a small change in our own lives. God is also said to be omniscient or all-knowing. Think about this challenge. If God knows everything, including what choices I'm going to make, am I really free? Here, the traditional theological response is that knowing what someone will do and determining an outcome are two different things. If I know you very well, I may be able to accurately predict what you'll do in any given situation. That, however, is not the same thing as making you act as you do. The same thing, it's said, is true of God, who knows everything. We're still free to choose our path, but God, knowing us perfectly, knows what we'll choose. Deciding whether we believe in God or reject theism for a more naturalistic explanation will probably change the way we live our lives. If a personal God exists, things will be expected of us, and we can breathe a sigh of relief because the world is in God's hands, not ours. And we will feel constrained in some ways to do certain things and avoid doing others. In the words of atheistic existentialists, our essence will be defined for us. The freedom that comes from denying God and affirming the human spirit is balanced by having only ourselves and other humans to rely on in solving our personal and cosmological problems. Most who affirm the existence of God will do so on the basis of intuitive knowing rather than rationalist proofs, and all who believe in God will face the dilemma of picturing an infinite being in anthropomorphic terms. Faced with the prospect of death, many people in Western countries turn to God for meaning and hope. In Asia and Africa, death is more fully integrated with life and may be seen as a natural conclusion to it, something to be relaxed into as one lets go of life. Stanley Kunitz evokes this gradual, still reluctant letting go of life in a poem that recalls the Viking practice of sending the dead out to sea in longboats.
The longboat. When his boat snapped loose from its moorings, under the squeaking of the gulls, he tried at first to wave to his dear ones on shore, but in the rolling fog, they had already lost their faces. Too tired even to choose between jumping and calling, somehow he felt absolved and free of his burdens. Those mottos stamped on his name tag, conscience, ambition, and all that caring. He was content to lie down with the family ghosts in the slough of his cradle, buffeted by the storm, endlessly drifting. Peace, peace, to be rocked by the infinite, as if it didn't matter which way was home, as if he didn't know He loved the earth so much, he wanted to stay forever.
Whatever our culture, the desire to stay forever is probably a typically human one. In our next lesson, we turn to Asia and Africa to examine other varieties of religious experience.
Where do you want to go?
I am going to UCLA Med School.
Where do you want to go?
The Great Barrier Reef.
Where do you want to go?
I want to go beyond the imagination.
At Orange Coast College, we offer small class sizes, more than 130 career programs, and university transfer programs to help prepare you for success. Wherever you want to go, we'll help you get there. Call Orange Coast College today.
Time to cast your ballots. Election time is here, and Real Orange is once again presenting a live election coverage special. We'll bring you constantly updated results on all the measures, propositions, and major candidates of this election season as they come in. And we'll get commentary from leaders on both sides of the aisle. With so much to see, you won't want to miss this Real Orange election special. Starting tonight at 6:30 on KOCE.
The first new settlement in Orange County after California statehood was actually a German colony. Called Anaheim for its location near the Santa Ana River, it was founded in 1857 by a group of German immigrants then living in San Francisco. The colonists dreamed of creating an agricultural community based on the production of grapes and wine. Anaheim was also the first town in the county to be developed according to a comprehensive master plan. In this way, it anticipated the planned communities of the modern era. The colonists sent a representative, George Hanson, ahead of the main party to purchase land and begin preparing their model town. When the first settlers finally set foot in Anaheim 2 years later, lots had already been laid out, roads cleared, an irrigation canal constructed, and acres of vineyards were in place and ready to bear fruit. The first house in the colony, built by George Hanson, can still be seen on West Street in Anaheim.
Earthquakes, floods, volcanoes, rockfalls, landslides. They make up some of the world's worst natural disasters. What causes these disasters, and what are we doing to prepare for them? What you'll find out will be ground-shaking. Watch Disaster Detectives. Coming November 22nd on KOCE. Expand your mind with Orange County Public Television, KOCE, and KOCE.
sometimes observe that the West has objectified God, made God into a thing to be studied, described, written about. Whatever ultimate reality is, Buddhists say, it's clearly not a something in the way a book or a TV set or a car is a something. The Buddha himself never claimed to be a god, merely a human being who was fully awake to life. And in the Buddha's encounters with evil, an interesting thing happens.
Mara, M-A-R-A, Mara is the Buddhist and Hindu equivalent of Satan. He's the embodiment of evil, of bad, of harm, of bad karma, of all of that nasty stuff. One of the things I like in Buddhism is that when Buddha meets Mara, he doesn't defeat him. What he does is he converts him. So every time Satan, to use Western, every time Satan is encountered by Buddha, that particular aspect, that particular part of Satan, component of Satan, is converted, and so Satan is diminished. If when you meet Satan, you just defeat him, he goes away mad. And then he pulls something like he pulled on Job, just to get back on people. But he's never diminished. And another thing I like about Buddhism is that eventually Mara will disappear. He'll be extinguished. There will be no Satan. There will be no hell. Everybody will be, I guess, saved is what you would have to say if you were using Western language. Hell is empty. In Buddhism, everybody is happy because nobody fries anywhere. Sooner or later, everybody is out, including Satan. I think that's marvelous. I mean, that's really good news. It makes me feel comfortable. I don't have any fear of death or anything of that kind, because I know that sooner or later I'm going to be okay. This is in contradistinction to Western approaches, where there's a dualism. There's heaven for the good and hell for those that are not so good, and it goes on for a long time, eternity, I'm told. And that would worry me. That would worry me to pieces. But I'm not worried, because I know even if I spend a little time getting purified, okay, sooner or later I'll be rescued, and sooner or later I'll come out. And that makes me very happy, and it makes me smile.
If the Buddha is not a god, but a wide-awake human being, what he offers his followers is a model for living a fully human life. Ethical principles in Buddhism, such as refrain from harming living things, may sound remarkably close to the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," until we remember that in Judaism and Christianity, God commands humans not to kill, while the Buddha offers the suggestion that you'll wake up faster if you refrain from harming living things. Much like someone who's been to college or boot camp or through a divorce or childbirth, the Buddha can help us avoid a certain amount of suffering. If the task in life is to wake up, to become enlightened, to see reality as it really is, what can we do to reach that goal? Ordinary existence tends to cloud our vision, to distract us from what really is and from what we really are. And we have so little control over our thoughts that they often seem to be controlling us rather than the other way around. The first step, Rich Walter explains, is to begin meditating.
What do? We sit. What do you do when you sit? You watch your mind. What? Well, you watch your mind. Now, you do this sometime, okay? People out there. You can sit in a chair, but what you should do is you should get comfortable so that, you're not, your mind isn't focused on the fact that you've got a wrinkle in your dress or something of this kind. And just sit quietly. Don't move. Don't, you can blink if you will. Just breathe, naturally. And of course, as soon as one tells you to breathe naturally, one can't breathe naturally anymore. And you don't have to close your eyes, but you can if you want. And just be aware of what's happening in your mind. And what will happen is thoughts will float in. Sometimes they don't float in, they rush in, they surge in. One of the beginning exercises that a person can do is, and this is recommended, is just to count. You know, just count when you breathe. Just count. You know, if you inhale, count to yourself. 1, you know, and then you inhale again, 2, oh, however you want to count. Count up to 10, and then begin again. What you will find, 99 times out of 100, is that you'll become so interested in and so absorbed by the thoughts going through your mind that you'll find yourself counting up around 25. You've gone clear past 10. Why? Because you have no control over your thoughts or what's going on in your mind. And since counting with most of us now has become automatic, we can do it while we're still thinking about things. Now, you know, what do you do? Well, what you do is not dwell on a thought. Say, oh, there's a nice thought, and just, you know, and let it go. But what happens is people start thinking, okay, there's a thought, I forgot to pay my bill today. And that generates another thought. Okay? And that thought is, I wonder where my checkbook is. And then that thought generates another thought. And it's this concatenation, this chain of thoughts over which we have no control. And the Buddha tells us, and Zen in particular tells us, that it's precisely control over this kind of mind activity that we have to establish. Because in Buddhism and in Zen in particular, it's a marvelous line in the Shin Shin Ming, which is the Mind-Heart Sutra. And it's the basis of my own practice. And the line is, things are things because of mind. And mind is mind because of things. And this is perfectly true. And unless you control these things that go through your mind, you can't allow the Buddha nature to happen.
Meditation is not the goal, but rather the first step in Buddhist spiritual practice. It's a means to an end. Another major difference between Buddhism and Judaism, Christianity, Islam is that Buddhism in general and Zen Buddhism in particular sees itself as a temporary aid to individuals who will wisely abandon it once they become awake. It's difficult to imagine a religion that seeks to put itself out of business, but this is just what Zen expects to do. When we first begin to ride a bicycle, we may need training wheels to help us keep our balance. But once we become proficient riders, the training wheels seem laughably unnecessary. It's the same with Zen. Once you learn to balance on a bike, you realize you always had this ability. You never really needed the training wheels. You only thought you did. Before you realized your true nature, you really did need the extra help. But now that you understand what lies within you, you can laugh gently at your earlier hesitation.
The story that's generally told in Zen and in Buddhism is if you are on one side of a river that's flowing by, and on your side of the river there is death, old age, suffering, illness, all of those things, and you see across the river an area in which there is no death, no suffering, none of those things, then how do you get from where you are to where you want to be? Well, you find a boat, a vessel, a vehicle, some kind of yana, and you get in it, and you paddle across, and then you're across the other side. You are across, gate, paragate, across, all the way across. And then what do you do with the boat? Well, Buddha said, wouldn't it be silly to put it on your back and carry it about with you? You don't need it anymore. Zen is a consciousness in which you know that when you arrive, you won't need it anymore. As a matter of fact, part of the awakening is that there were not two shores, that there was no river to cross. And when you get across the other side and you look around, you're on the same side you were to start with, except you see it differently. It's a different way of seeing. And your behavior, because of this different way of seeing in the world, this different insight, becomes different and altered.
Zen promises self-reliance and offers neither the comfort nor the discomfort that comes from believing in a personal God. For Westerners, giving up our anthropomorphism may be harder than we think. And yet, as we've seen, thinking of God as a someone is not without its problems either. Western theologian Mary Daly suggests we think of God not as a noun, but as a verb, the most active and dynamic verb of all. To think of God as dynamism brings East and West a little closer together. There's a bit of a taste of dynamism in this short poem by Ann Darr, who flew planes as a Women's Air Force service pilot during World War II. Listen as she describes a dream in which angels lead her on wings of ecstasy.
Logbook turned to feathers. In the dream, my logbook turned to feathers, and I flew close formation with a band of angels flying home. We did wingovers under bridges on the Nile and pylon 8s around the Taj Mahal. Wingtip to wingtip, we headed for the sun with visibility unlimited of planets yet unknown. In a blaze that seared my eyes to blisters, they were gone through gates I could not follow. And I fell through haze, through clouds, through time. I could not tell whether the gates were heaven or hell, but I was caught in Leonardo's gaze, and Goddard's skull was tolling like a bell.
Anthropomorphism is neither necessary nor appropriate here. It's the experience that matters. In some African cultures, God is more a transformer than a creator out of nothing and shares our world with us. This has a couple of consequences. If God occupies this world as we do, rather than being off somewhere, this world is made holy by God's presence in it. Another implication may be that God is subject to some of the same laws of creation we are. Among the Arkan, a state drummer consoling a ruler on the death of a person might say in drum language, "The Creator created death, and death killed him." In other words, once death is created, everything and everyone must die, and not even God can alter that law. This brings God a little closer to the human experience. If a lot less powerful, this God is a lot more approachable. And as this African immortality symbol suggests, unless God dies, I won't die. What we say about God says more about us than we may think. And how we imagine the afterlife can give us clues about our own deepest hopes and fears. As poet Hilary Tom describes Chinese folk beliefs about the next world, listen to how full of detail, how completely imagined that other world is. Children, long dead, can even become engaged.
The Chinese believe that after you die, you don't actually go to heaven or anything like that. You go into a fourth dimension where it's very similar to this life. You need food, drink, and housing and transportation. So that's why it's so important to have sons to, burn Bank of Hell money for them and offer them food and burn houses, not real houses, paper houses for the dead. I've noticed actually that in the Oriental stores that I do my shopping, they have a section where they have this paraphernalia for ancestor worship. The Bank of Hell money has been getting larger and larger denominations. They used to be like $10 and $50 bills when I was young, but now they're all in the hundreds and thousands. Letter from Malaysia. I have arranged a marriage, my mother wrote, for your sister and the third son of the Tong family. He is single and he died 10 years ago. Your sister liked him at the viewing ceremony, the medium said, and promises to behave once she is wed. It has been a terrible time since your brother's wedding. Sickness in the house, his bride screaming each night in her sleep, their dreams troubled by fingers squeezing their throats. In secret, I went to the temple, begged Kuan Yin's help. The medium said it was your sister, 18 years quiet in her grave, roused by her brother's marriage, desires her own. You know your brother. He laughs at me and my faith. I tell him nothing. I tell you because she would like you to know and rejoice at her happiness. You were so close in her life. One other thing, your brother's wife has stopped screaming in her sleep since the marriage was announced to the ancestors. Thank the goddess, everyone is healthy now.
The ordinariness of this afterlife lends it credibility and brings it closer to our ordinary earthly lives. As we discussed in an earlier lesson, if you grew up in Benin in West Africa, you would learn that the high God is a model of unity in duality. God is Mawu, fertility, motherhood, life, creativity, gentleness, forgiveness, rest, and joy. And God is Lisa, power, warlikeness, death, strength, destructivity, heat, and labor. The Ga of Ghana call their high god a name that translates as Father, Mother, Sky God. And an Arkan child might be named Dwa Agyeman, tree, meaning female principle, warrior, meaning male principle. If God shares this world with us, the distance between the human and the divine shrinks. Anthropomorphism, if it exists, may be more inclusive, and human experiences may seem holy. African dancer Dawn Barnes explains how dance functions as an act of worship in the culture of Liberia in which she grew up.
But one of the things as an African dancer that I find that is most misunderstood is the nature of African dance. Dance in African culture is not a form of entertainment or leisure only. It could be, but most often dance is connected to worship. It's equivalent to expressing our thanks, our deepest fears, our prayers, our hopes to the Creator. And the idea of frenzied movement, the idea of hypnotic movement, of repetitious movement until you enter this state of ecstasy is considered to be the height of spirituality. And of course, if you look at Western forms of worship where serenity and stillness are seen to be holy and expressions of connectedness with the Creator, then this looks totally barbaric. It looks totally, what are they doing? They're throwing their arms and they're convulsing their bodies. It's very, for the Western eye, vulgar. But, it's a total misunderstanding. Not that one form of expression is any superior to the other. It's just a totally different approach to connecting with the universe. On the one hand, being very still, being very meditative in a quiet way. On the other hand, being very energized, being very rhythmic, and in doing this repetitious rhythm, finding a connection with the spirit world. It's two totally different approaches. I think, from my study of meditation, that both ways can connect you. And you just have to know where you are in that particular moment. If you need stillness and quiet, nothing will substitute. On the other hand, there are times when there's tension in your body, when there's conflict in your thoughts, and the only healing that you will receive would be to become energized and to allow your body to express this. And I cannot, for the life of me, figure out how people who do not dance ever get rid of this tension. Because if I didn't have that outlet, I can't imagine that I would be mentally healthy. So dance for me is much, much, much deeper than just a couple of movements for entertainment or leisure. It's the way that I relate to who I am and to my Creator. And it's because it's so sacred. It was very hard for me when I studied dance in the Western culture because I resented being graded. I resented being evaluated because
to me, it was like, well, how can it be wrong? You know, if that's how I really feel, or if this is what I'm really doing with the best of my ability. So I think kind of the philosophy and my worldview of dance as an art form means that as long as a person is honest, as long as a person is connected with what he or she is doing, then the person is doing the best that he or she can do, and nothing more can be expected. Simple as that.
Disconnected from our bodies, we may be unable to imagine this kind of worship or to see a physically induced state of ecstasy as the highest spiritual state. If one rejects atheism and agnosticism to be a theist, the most interesting question remains to be answered. What kind of God do you believe in? William James, the American pragmatist philosopher, thought agnosticism was not a viable option. Belief in God was, in his view, too important a question for fence straddling. Either believe in God or don't believe in God, but don't sit on the fence. How you answer this question will affect how you live your life, so make a decision one way or the other. Whether or not we are theists, if the human condition defines our limits, they may be more narrow than they need to be. Theologians tell us God is too big to fit our tiny, finite human categories, yet these are all we have. And how we describe an image deity affects our human relationships as well as our worship. As women begin to think through the questions of religion and the stories of the Bible using their own experience as a guide, they sometimes make surprising observations. Watching the leaves fall, poet Linda Paston realizes something new about the biblical Garden of Eden and about her relationships with both Eve and Adam.
It's called The Way the Leaves Keep Falling. It is November and morning, time to get to work. I feel the little whip of my conscience flick as I stand at the window watching the great harvest of leaves. Across the street, my neighbor, his leaf blower already roaring, tries to make order from the chaos of fading color. He seems brave and a bit foolish. It is almost tidal, the way the leaves keep falling, wave after wave to earth. In Eden, there were no seasons, and sometimes I think it was the tidiness of that garden Eve hated, all the wooden tags with the new names of plants and trees. Still, I am Adam's child too, and I like order, though the margins of my poems are ragged, and I stand here all morning watching the leaves.
We are all Adam, and we are all Eve. Telling the story of God using only one set of human characteristics appears to diminish it. The questions of metaphysics, what is real in the world, the human person, the divine, appear to be interrelated. Let's try to keep all of them in mind as we follow the path of wisdom to a new branch of philosophy, epistemology or knowledge theory.
Discover oceans of opportunity at Golden West College. We offer small class sizes, affordable tuition, and financial aid is available for those who qualify. With more than 50 university transfer programs, Golden West College provides the resources for getting a higher education. We offer courses in criminal justice, automotive technology, visual communication, and more, like degree programs in nursing and certificate programs in architectural technology. At Golden West College, discover oceans of opportunity.
Time to cast your ballots. Election time is here, and Real Orange is once again presenting a live election coverage special. We'll bring you constantly updated results on all the measures, propositions, and major candidates of this election season as they come in. And we'll get commentary from leaders on both sides of the aisle. With so much to see, you won't want to miss this Real Orange election special. Starting tonight at 6:30 on KOCE. Travel host and renowned guidebook author Rick Steves is coming to KOCE to share lessons he's learned from a lifetime of travel. See Rick Steves in person during a 90-minute smart travel lecture on Friday, December 1st at the KOCE studios in Huntington Beach. This is your chance to learn all the latest tips from Rick on stretching your vacation dollar, avoiding crowds, eating and sleeping well, and packing smart. Tickets are just $50 per person or $25 for KOCE members and their families. Call 1-800-278-5050 or visit koce.org today.
Hi, I'm Dan Elias, inviting you to Antiques Roadshow. Join us as we search for America's hidden treasures.
Really? Wow.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. It's Antiques Roadshow, next time from Cleveland, Ohio. Don't miss it.
Tonight at 8 on KOCE.
As the 20th century dawned, Orange County had a population of less than 20,000, but it was on the threshold of dramatic new growth. One of the most important catalysts for change was a breakthrough in transportation, the interurban trolley. Trolleys were less expensive to operate than conventional trains, and they were powered by a clean and efficient energy source, electricity. In 1901, the Pacific Electric Company of Los Angeles began building a series of interurban trolley lines that would eventually connect most parts of Southern California in a comprehensive light rail network. The trolleys, or Big Red Cars as they were popularly known, were an immediate hit, providing Southlanders with fast, efficient, and inexpensive transportation. Communities throughout Orange County were eager to enjoy the benefits of the new transit system. In order to attract trolley service to their area, the developers of what was then called Pacific City decided to rename the town Huntington Beach in honor of Henry Huntington, owner of the Pacific Electric Company. They also offered Mr. Huntington a substantial land bonus. Their efforts proved successful, and on July 4th, 1904, the first trolley arrived in Huntington Beach. The construction of additional Pacific Electric lines brought growth to other parts of Orange County. Towns such as Cypress, La Habra, and Yorba Linda owed much of their early development to the coming of the Big Red Cars.
On Nova, they hide in the dark, shred light and time.
You stick your finger down in there, you ain't getting it back.
Black holes, the most violent force in the universe.
They are the enemy you cannot defeat.
Follow the latest race into nature's no man's land. Monster of the Milky Way on Nova.
Wednesday at 8 on KOCE. Expand your mind with Orange County Public Television, KOCE and KOCE-DT.
If you'd lived during the Middle Ages in what is today called Europe, you would have been certain about a great many things. Nation-states did not exist, so there was no Britain, Spain, Germany, France, or Italy. Instead, there was Christendom, the church state of those who practiced Christianity. In practical terms, there was often not much option about what to believe, and those who didn't conform risked torture and even death. A few people were very rich and powerful, while most were desperately poor and illiterate as well. In many towns during this period, magnificent cathedrals rose toward the sky. To visit one of these on Sunday was to enter another world. Even if you couldn't read or write, you could look at the Bible stories on the beautiful stained glass windows. Although your house was a hovel with a dirt floor and no windows, the house of God was splendid. Very likely you would live and die within 20 miles of the place of your birth. Your life would be one of hard work and an early death, but there would be much about which you had absolute certainty. God, you would have learned at church, made you, saved you, loves you, and promises you a better life after death. Faith was a certainty. And you could trust what you learned through your senses. For example, every morning the sun rose in the eastern sky, providing light for your work in the fields. At noon, it stood directly overhead as you paused to pray the Angelus prayer when the church bells rang. Finally, in the evening, it set in the west. You knew the earth was the center of the great drama of salvation, the struggle between good and evil, in which the human soul was the prize. And you knew the earth was stationary while the sun moved. Some thinkers developed what they called a natural theology. Unlike revealed theology, in which truth comes as a revelation from God, this approach used only human reason to arrive at religious truths such as the existence of God. Known as scholasticism because it was developed by schoolmen or professors at the University of Paris, this tradition of tightly reasoned structure and grand theories has fallen out of favor with many in the modern world, including novelist Mary Gordon, who was raised a Catholic but finds herself uncomfortable with scholasticism, which she views as excessively abstract.
There is a dualism that I think comes from being Irish, and that comes from the very structure of Christianity that I both love and have to fight against. That there's a clarity of terms that I adore. I'm anti-systemic. There's something about somebody telling me that there's one way of describing the world that is the right way that immediately makes me rebel. And yet I am very drawn to ways of describing the world that seem to be the case and that seem to ask the most difficult questions and to take in the most difficult evidence and to have a kind of shapeliness about them. But I don't think those are ever large theories. I like close readings. I guess maybe I'm an intellectual new critic. I like looking at things closely and trying to make sure as much as possible, though of course this is a doomed and impossible task, that what you say is the case. And I kind of feel ferocious about that.
Large theories that claim to explain everything can make us feel very secure, and they can exclude or marginalize much of life. The certainties of the medieval world came crashing down following discoveries like those of Copernicus, who proved with mathematics that the sun was the fixed point and the earth one of several planets revolving about it. Those living in the time we now call the Enlightenment looked back on the Middle Ages as a time of darkness and superstition. Looking to the Greek and Roman past, they found inspiration for the life of the mind. Reason, they claimed, was man's highest ability, and with it he could solve every puzzle. What the church termed mysteries were only unsolved scientific problems. As faith contested with reason, many became confused. Should they believe the church or the scientist? If the obvious truth that the sun revolved around the earth was not to be believed, what else might turn out to be false? The tension between reason and faith, or between reason and experience, remains. One way out of this impasse may be to distinguish between knowledge and the condition of knowing that makes knowledge possible. Listen as poet Lee Young Lee explains the condition of knowing from which a poet writes. He's describing the poem about hearing a person weeping that we heard him read in Lesson 2.
I wrote the poem out of my love for, the epistles of Paul to the Corinthians and Ephesians and all of those epistles. And it occurred to me when I was reading them that Paul speaks from a kind of knowledge, whereas I speak from a kind of unknowing. And I think that the poet writes in a condition of knowing, but not out of knowledge. And I make a distinction between the two in my mind, because I don't think the poet has to have any special knowledge, but the poet has to be able to access a condition of knowing to write the poem in. I always have the feeling that when one is writing the poem, that the poem spends the knowledge as it is being written, so that there's nothing left afterwards. So really, in a way, the poet doesn't carry anything away from the writing of the poem to help him write the next poem.
Poets spend their knowledge in the writing of the poem, but they keep the condition of intuitive knowing that permits them to write the next poem. This condition is not so different from what people in the Middle Ages called faith. It implies an assumption that one can know things worth knowing, and it requires a degree of belief. Beginning in Germany and spreading throughout Great Britain and Europe, reformers separated from the unity that had called itself Christendom. Translating the Bible from Latin into the spoken languages of ordinary people made the scriptures available, at least to those who could read. And people were told to approach God directly, without a priest as intermediary. The Protestant Reformation broke up the political and theological unity that had existed during the Middle Ages. Many were exhilarated, while others were confused and frightened. In art, very recognizable human faces began appearing on walls and canvases. During the Middle Ages, Western art dealt with religious subjects, and the artist would not have dared to sign his name. With the Renaissance, or rebirth of imagination and form, new, more realistic images emerged. Perspective was discovered, and the flat paintings of the Middle Ages gave way to three-dimensional scenes. Sculptors such as Michelangelo Buonarroti secretly stole and dissected corpses to find out how muscles and ligaments attach to bones. His work reveals the knowledge of a surgeon as well as the skill of an artist. Hearing a discussion about which of two sculptors carved a work, neither name mentioned was his, Michelangelo got his chisel and carved his name on this now famous Pietà. It was the age of the individual, of love for a classical past, of rich color and realistic images. In the aftermath of the Enlightenment, Reformation, and Renaissance, philosophers debated whether reason or experience was the more reliable guide. Faith was dismissed as superstition. Some insisted all truth must stand the test of logic, while others rejected anything not experienced through the senses. Nothing in the Western world would ever be as claustrophobic or as secure again. In the 18th century, the most extreme of the experience-based or empiricist philosophers, David Hume, divided knowledge into two varieties. There is, he said, deductive or logical knowledge of the 2 + 2 = 4 variety. This gives us certainty, but doesn't tell us anything we really want to know about the world. Philosophers call this a priori knowledge because it's prior to and independent of experience. Then there's inductive or scientific knowledge about the boiling point of water, how far California is from Maryland, how much a CD costs, which does tell us about the world, but is doomed to uncertainty since conditions in the world are always subject to change. This is called a posteriori knowledge because it's after experience and depends on experience for its foundation. Anything that doesn't fit one of these two knowledge definitions is meaningless, Hume said. Notice that what Hume has declared meaningless includes religion, deductive philosophies such as Plato's, and intuition. The tug of war between reason and experience is one of the key struggles in Western thought. Some follow logic, others science, and each criticizes the aims and methods of the other. In our next two lessons, we'll explore this debate in the Western and non-Western worlds, and then turn to related questions of truth as they are asked and answered in the West and as they appear in Asia and Africa. While everyone seeks truth, there's little agreement about where to find it. You may find the debates intriguing, absurd, perplexing, or provocative. Beyond the traditional routes to truth through faith, reason, and sense experience, there's another avenue. Art has as one of its functions the revelation of things not immediately apparent. Lessons 16 and 17 explore the ability of art to show us things we might ordinarily miss, to open the world up to us or focus it down to the very small. Art, at its best, helps us to see things differently. Here's a short passage from Irish writer John McGahern's novel Amongst Women. Moran, the protagonist, is a charming tyrant whose two daughters have come home for the weekend to ease the pain of their brother Michael's leaving home. And Moran has taken them to the railway station for the trip back to Dublin. Notice how truly and succinctly this passage tells us something about the passage of time.
I'm thankful for all you did for Michael. He surprised them by saying as they waited in the car outside the railway station the next evening, "We're sorry we couldn't get him to come home," Mona mumbled. "I know you did your best. That's all anybody in the family can do." On the platform, he kissed them as the train drew in. They told him they would be down again before very long. The two sisters were silent as the train crossed the Shannon, travelling through fields. As the train was pulling into Drummond, the small platform black with people like themselves returning to Dublin at the end of the weekend, Mona said in an emotional voice, "No matter what they say, Daddy can be wonderful." Sheila nodded her head in vigorous agreement. "When Daddy's nice, he's just great. Like no other person." And even the small white stones under the lights on the station platform took on a special glow. Morn went out to the road and closed the iron gates under the yew after returning with the car from the station. He listened for the noise of the diesel train crossing the plains behind the house, but it had already passed. The light was beginning to fail, but he did not want to go into the house. In a methodical way, he set out to walk his land, field by blind field. He had not grown up on these fields, but they felt to him as if he had. He had bought them with the money he'd been given on leaving the army. The small pension wasn't enough to live on, but with working the fields, he had turned it into a living. He'd be his own man here, he had thought, and for the first time in his life he'd be away from people. Now he went from field to field, no longer kept as well as they once were, the hedges ragged, stones fallen from the walls, but he hardly needed the fields anymore. It did not take much to keep Rose and himself. It was like grasping water to think how quickly the years had passed here. They were nearly gone. It was in the nature of things, and yet it brought a sense of betrayal and anger, of never having understood anything much. Instead of using the fields, he sometimes felt as if the fields had used him. Soon they would be using someone else in his place. It was unlikely to be either of his sons. He tried to imagine someone running the place after he was gone and could not. He continued walking the fields like a man trying to see.
Writers have the power of the word, and visual artists have the power of the image to command as they teach us how to use our eyes. The capacity of oil or watercolor to depict a three-dimensional world on a flat surface is nothing short of amazing. On the one hand, the artist struggles to paint or draw what's there, and at the same time, he or she tries to give us more than what's immediately apparent. At its best, art will do more than inspire us. It will also confront and challenge us. Finding out what upsets you may be just as useful as finding out what inspires you or gives you pleasure. Art explores the limits and uncovers what's repressed. It can also show us in a flash where our prejudices reside. Artist Ron Roberson thinks these are the very things we as a society need to be looking at. One of the greatest services our arts can render, he thinks, is to point the way to inequities, as well as issues of identity and power. What has the power to shock us retains the power of revelation.
I think the question of what we can learn from art, what it can do for our perceptions, the kind of truths that it can bring, is an important one. And a question that goes along with that is, why is it that some kind of images makes people so frightened? I mean, what is it about images that frighten people? What is it about some kind of content that gets the forces out, that motivates people to want to go and do something? So I think there is something in images. I think all the controversy about nudity, I mean, I think there's kind of a lesson there. What is there about a nude human body that gets people so upset? What is it that gets people marching? What is it that gets people picketing? What is it that gets people writing their congressman about a simple depiction of a nude? Well, there's something there. I mean, there's something in those representations that speak to our insecurities, that speak to sexual frustrations and social frustrations, and questions about identity, and questions about difference, and questions about power. And all of that stuff can be brought to the surface simply by a kind of image that presents kind of a situation, I guess, that people bounce their feelings off and bounce their securities off. So it certainly would seem from our past experience that images still have the power to touch people in places, in pleasant places, but also in places where they don't want to be touched. And I think the best example of that, as I said, is the way that nudity has become a hot topic. So it's really interesting how abstraction doesn't upset anybody anymore. I mean, abstraction used to be the thing that made people angry. Well, who is it that gets angry because they see an abstract image? I mean, when's the last time you saw an abstract painting and you wanted to tear it off the wall, or you wanted to write your congressman? I mean, who writes their congressman because they saw an abstract painting that they didn't like. However, if you really think about images that have content, is what seems to make people nervous. Images that speak to people's identity, images that highlight problems, seems to be something that makes people concerned. Images that are about relationships between people, images that reveal inequities. So it certainly seems to me that that images have a power to cut through this construct that we build for ourselves and make us realize that in many ways, though we're we're surrounded with all this mechanical stuff and technology, that we still have those same concerns that the Greeks had, the same things that frighten them frighten us, that we still haven't worked through a lot of the same problems that people have been trying to work through for centuries. And I think that for many people who would not think of reading a book to realize some of these issues, images have the power to create that revelation in people instantaneously. Even people don't necessarily want to have that revelation, because you don't have to invest a lot of time to get it. In fact, you don't even want to have to get it. All you have to do is be confronted by an image, and suddenly it's there. So I think that's the power of images. And one of the reasons why there's so many people who want to control images, want to control people's access to images, want to control what people can see.
Even for those who choose not to read, there's no escaping the power of the image. Is it an alternative route to truth? When we deal in images, we avoid the confusion of language. However, much of what we encounter every day contains words as well as images. As we search for truth, it's important that we say what we mean and mean what we say. Here are some informal fallacies, some ways of making sure we cannot reach a valid conclusion that must be avoided if we're to reach our goal of finding the truth.
Following this policy will mean the end of life as we know it.
It's true, because my textbook says it's true.
Mac could not possibly have cheated. I know him, and he's not a cheater.
You can't prove that piercing your ears to wear earrings doesn't lower IQ. So it must be true that the practice does lower IQ.
You missed the test. Clearly, you have contempt for me or for this course.
No one with green hair can possibly have anything intelligent to say.
God is love, and love is blind. Stevie Wonder's blind. Stevie Wonder must be God.
This blood test will evaluate you for hepatitis, anemia, and AIDS, which you'll receive absolutely free.
I know this is a good book. This must be a wonderful library.
Since this is a good library, every book in it must be wonderful.
If none of these statements seems even close to the truth, you're judging correctly. We turn next to theories of knowledge and their implications.
I'm transferring to State University in just 14 months.
I'm completing my degree online, on my schedule.
I'm completing my degree halfway around the world.
I've always had a love for the arts.
Coastline Community College offers something for everyone, from accelerated degree programs to online courses. We have day and evening classes and satellite campuses throughout Orange County. Coastline Community College, accessible anytime, anywhere.
Time to cast your ballots. Election time is here, and Real Orange is once again presenting a live election coverage special. We'll bring you constantly updated results on all the measures, propositions, and major candidates of this election season as they come in. And we'll get commentary from leaders on both sides of the aisle. With so much to see, you won't want to miss this Real Orange election special. Starting tonight at 6:30 on KOCE. Blanco is back. Last year, KOCE displayed over 100 pieces of Blanco's beautiful hand-blown glass in our studio. This year, we're displaying twice as many of these uniquely crafted dishes, vases, and other works of art. And of course, Richard Blanco will be here to personally sign any gift you may wish to bring home with you. Admission is free, so don't let these pieces collect dust. Come to our studio in Huntington Beach, Sunday, November 12th from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Visit koce.org for more details or call 714-895-5623.
If you've ever wandered through a cemetery, you know how cool it can be. Old monuments, unusual markers, angels, flowers, local history, loved ones, Memorial Day, an arts festival, roosters. They're all part of a cemetery special.
Wednesday at 10 on KOCE.
It's time for all seniors to get out for their annual flu shots, not just for themselves, but for everyone who loves them.
Grandpa's home.
Be smart, be well, get your flu shot. A public service message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
From American experience.
The only thing that comes close to the fear that yellow fever engendered is a biological attack.
To stop a killer disease.
What it did to its victims just horrified people.
A team of doctors was ready to pay the ultimate price.
They would experiment on themselves.
It's not a quiet death.
The Great Fever on American Experience.
Thursday at 10 on KOCE.
We've turned homes into concert halls and preschools. Now digital television is about to change PBS. But one thing will never change. PBS will be there for you in the digital future, just as we have in the past, but only with your support.
Bob Hope.
But it's a great, great thrill to be back here with
Milton Berle.
Oh, Milton, where do you get this material?
And Red Skelton.
Good luck. May God bless.
They were superstars of vaudeville, radio, and television. Join them as they look back on their legendary careers, on the pioneers of primetime.
Saturday at 9 on KOCE. Expand your mind with Orange County Public Television, KOCE, and
What do you know, and how do you know it? Think about something you're really sure you know. It might be a fact, a higher truth, someone's feelings for you. Now try to think about how you know what you think you know. Is knowing primarily a matter of logic and rationality, sense experience, common sense, intuition, or something else? Philosophers have debated this question for centuries. Think about the way you see the world. Each of us has a tiny window on reality. In fact, we see a deceptive scenario in which the world and everything in it revolves around us. On some level, we acknowledge that we're not the center of the universe, but everything we experience tells us we are. To complicate matters further, I would describe this outfit as pink. If you agree with me, I have no idea whether what you mean by pink is at all like what I mean by pink. We could have two completely different things in mind. And if one of us is colorblind, things get even more complicated. None of us has a God's eye view of the world as it really is. All we have is the world as it appears to us. Philosophers call this the egocentric predicament, and one of their goals is to escape from it. Since the world seems to depend so much on our role as perceivers and rememberers, an interesting question is, do things or concepts cease to exist if there's no one to remember them? Poet Mark Strand considers this possibility in his poem, Always.
Always, always so late in the day in their rumpled clothes, sitting around a table lit by a single bulb, the great forgetters were hard at work. They tilted their heads to one side, closing their eyes. Then a house disappeared, and a man in his yard with all his flowers in a row. The great forgetters wrinkled their brows. Then Florida went, and San Francisco, where tugs and barges leave small gleaming scars across the bay. One of the great forgetters struck a match. Gone were the harps of beaded lights that vault the rivers of New York. Another filled his glass, and that was it for crowds at evening under sulfur yellow street lamps coming on. And afterwards Bulgaria was gone, and then Japan. Where will it stop? One of them said. Such difficult work pursuing the fate of everything known, said another. Down to the last stone, said a third, and only the cold zero of perfection left for the imagination. One of the great forgetters coughed, and gone were North and South America, and gone as well the moon. Another yawned, another gazed at the window. No grass, no trees, the blaze of promise everywhere.
Intriguing. Just how extensive is your role in holding reality in place? Let's take a look at some ways we use to know. If I make the statement A is A, we can reason from this to some other statements. For instance, A is not non-A, and something is either A or non-A, but not both. This is an example of deduction. We're proceeding rationally from one idea to the next without reference to the world of particular things or our experience of it. This kind of reasoning leads to certain knowledge. Unfortunately, it's knowledge of things that may not seem of the most vital importance to us. Now, let's take another example. Suppose I want to find out what happens to the boiling point of water as I go higher or lower than sea level. What I need to do is go to several different locations, bring water to a boil, and measure the temperature at which this occurs using a thermometer. When we begin with particulars rather than broad general principles, we're in the realm of induction. This gives us knowledge about the world. Unfortunately, it's not certain knowledge. I may know that the U.S. has 50 states, but if one is added or subtracted, my knowledge must change. Even the boiling point of water could change dramatically following an environmental cataclysm. Knowledge arrived at by induction is always uncertain because it's based on the world, and the world is always capable of change. The third type of knowledge is based on intuition. Unlike deduction and induction, both of which move by logical or experimental steps, intuition is an all-at-once flash. When you've been trying as hard as you can to remember the name of a movie or a song, but give up in frustration, and then sit up in the middle of the night with the answer, you've experienced intuition. And you probably have no idea how you arrived at the information. Clearly, you didn't go through a series of steps or a methodical experiment. You were doing something else or nothing at all, and suddenly the information was there. The same kind of thing happens when a light bulb goes on and you realize something about the world or yourself or another person. This is intuition. As Rich Walter explains, stories describe the Buddha's enlightenment as an intuitive flash.
He sat under a tree, a Bodhi tree, and he vowed that he would sit there until he found out the way things really were. And he sat, and he sat, and he sat. And he saw the morning star come up one day, that's Venus, and suddenly everything was clear to him. Everything fell in place. Now, when I say everything fell in place, I don't mean that some things fell in place. I mean everything fell in place. There was nothing about which he did not know. There was nothing for which he did not have an answer, the correct answer. There was nothing outside his scope of knowledge. It's been said that there have been only two human beings in the history of the world that people have asked the question, what are you, not who are you? They meet you and I and they say, who are you? And I say, well, no, this is who I am. One, of course, is Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth said, I am the anointed, I am the Christ, I am God. When Buddha was asked this, he said, I am awake. This is the essence of Buddhism. To be awake is to see things as they are, not to see things through concepts, not to see things through the eyes of others, not to see things as they might have been or as you wish they were, not to see things through the lens of the past or the lens of the future, but see things as they are right now, and to see things without any modifiers, without any adjectives, just to see things as they are. And when you do that, when that becomes possible, you're very, very free, because you're no longer under any kind of delusion. And this leads to a freedom of activity.
Once the Buddha understood everything, he was free. Knowledge has that kind of power. Let's try to keep all three of these approaches, deduction, induction, intuition, in mind as we look at the ideas of some philosophers. If you've ever used the expression mind over matter, you understand something important about the philosophy of René Descartes. He wrote his philosophy during the early 17th century, a time when the scientific revolution was threatening the powerful Christian church, and scientists like Galileo, who offered proof that the sun and not the earth was the stable center of our world, and that the surface of the moon was uneven rather than smooth, were threatened with torture until they renounced their own theories. A major challenge was making scientific knowledge acceptable to the church. Descartes took on this challenge. Using deduction, he determined to doubt everything until he came to an undoubtable premise. As he was doubting, Descartes discovered that this process, at least, was undoubtable. If he was doubting, and he clearly was, that meant he was thinking. And if he was thinking, he existed, at least as a mental self. The next problem was getting out of his own mental processes to knowledge of the external world. You may be surprised at how he accomplished this. Reasoning that a powerful but evil deity could fool us into thinking false things true, Descartes decided that only logically proving the existence of a good God who would not deceive him would permit him to trust his senses. Relying on proofs for the existence of God, like the one developed by Anselm that we discussed in Lesson 9, Descartes reasoned God into existence. The perfect God in his mind must have all the attributes of perfection, including existence. Critics say that Descartes argued circularly. The clear and distinct idea of God he believed he was born with is the basis for proving the existence of God. And yet, only God can guarantee that Descartes' ideas, including his idea of God, represent reality. Each item supports the other, but there is no independent justification for either. Philosophers call this begging the question. In any case, Descartes successfully negotiated an accommodation between science and the church by dividing the world into mind and matter, and declaring matter the province of science and mind the province of the church. Mind, he said, was thinking, unextended substance. It was not extended in space. And mind enjoyed free will. It could choose and be responsible for choices. Matter, by contrast, was unthinking, extended in space, and determined, that is, not free. Hit a tennis ball against a wall, and science can tell you the laws by which it will bounce back to you. The trajectory or path of the ball is determined by the rules of what Descartes called the clockwork universe, and the ball has no option but to obey those rules. Science can describe the actions of physical objects and predict what will happen to them under specific conditions. Mind, on the other hand, is free. It stands apart from the clockwork universe and makes its own decisions. Rational human beings are free to choose between good and evil, as the Church insists, and they can be held accountable for what they choose. This compromise seemed to offer a safe role for the new science that did not threaten the authority of the Church. However, it was not entirely problem-free. If mind and body are two completely separate and incompatible substances, how in the world do they interact in a human person? Descartes indicated the pineal gland in the brain as the transfer point between mind and body, but this tells us nothing about how such a transfer might happen. Since Descartes died prematurely of pneumonia, contracted while teaching the Queen of Sweden philosophy, the so-called mind-body problem was left to others to resolve. Yogis can speed up or slow down their heart rates, raise and lower their body temperature, even change their very metabolism. And all of us influence healing processes in our bodies, depending on whether or not we expect to get well and on the amount of stress we're experiencing. Eastern traditions, including the practices of yoga and Tai Chi, are far more likely than the West to insist that body, mind, and spirit are one. As Edna Brandt explains, body, mind, and spirit work together to replenish the acquired qi that protects our inherited qi, the energy of life itself.
There are two kinds of, well, there are many kinds of qi, but one way to think about it is that there's inherited qi and acquired qi. And inherited qi is the qi that you're born with, that we get at conception and through our gestation. So it comes from our parents, and there's a certain core amount of that. It's kind of like the deck of cards that you're born with, that you're dealt, and that's what you have for your life. And some of us have better quality of essence. This is called essence, this inherited qi, or jing. Chinese call it jing. And when that qi, that inherited qi or jing, is used up, and it is inevitably used up during life, then that's the end of your life. So you need to protect that. And the way you protect that is to have a good lifestyle and to make a good layer of what's called acquired qi around it. And acquired qi is the qi that we get during our life. And we get the qi through the food we eat. We get qi through the air that we breathe. We get qi through the interactions and relationships we have. We get qi through the learnings that we get. We get qi through our spiritual development. We get qi all kinds of ways in our life. And the best quality qi that we can acquire is the best for us because it protects our essence the most. So we have a good amount of qi. If we have a good lifestyle, we have a good amount of acquired qi. That's our kind of cushion, let's say. And inevitably, you spend some of that. Of course, we're going to spend it. And if you go and work really hard for several days in a row and stay up really late, then you spend some of that acquired qi. And that's okay, as long as you replenish it, as long as you rest and put it back in. But if you take a big chunk out of your qi and leave it, don't replenish it, and then stay up and work another several days, and then don't eat right, and then go out and have a big party the next night, and don't replenish anything, don't stop, and you start taking chunks out of that acquired qi. And pretty soon, you're really getting in close to your core essence. And you may actually still look outwardly like you're fine, but something's going on. You're using up and not replenishing your reserves. And sooner or later, you begin to chunk into your essence. You begin to pull from your essence. These are people who are running on empty, running on guts, sometimes you say. And they can do it, you can do it, but you're using your core energy, and it's not good for you. It's actually dangerous for you. So it's good to think about protecting your core energy, and when you spend some of your energy, spend a nice balance of time in gathering it back up and replenishing it so that you have the longest and best life that you can.
It seems clear that Tai Chi assumes body, mind, and spirit work together. If Descartes' division of substances is accurate, how is it possible for the various parts of me to interact and even form a unity? One of the Western ways to resolve the mind-body problem is to think of mind and body not as opposites, but as two ends of one continuum. On a continuum, everything is related to everything else, even if items at either end are more different from each other than items beside one another are. If we think of hot and cold as a continuum, there'll be many points in the middle labeled warm. In fact, what seems warm to a cold hand is likely to be quite different from what seems warm to an already warm hand. This is essentially the position taken by Anne Finch Conway, who, like Descartes, reasoned deductively. Mind and body, or as she put it, spirit and matter, exist on the same continuum, but spirit exists at a higher level than matter. God is pure spirit, and people are a mixture of spirit and matter, capable of moving toward virtue or vice as a reflection of this dualism. Conway sees matter as alive, since it's a product of divine creation. So in her philosophy, there is no mind-body problem. Body and spirit, two similar substances, both of which are alive, interact naturally with one another. We've been looking at deductive approaches to knowledge and specifically to how we know what we ourselves are like. Another very different approach begins not with general theories, but with specific observations. Empiricist philosophers who followed the rationalists historically in the Western tradition insist we begin with direct sense experience if we want to have any hope of learning about the world. Sir Isaac Newton, who formulated the laws of classical physics, began this way. After many repeated observations, Newton formulated 3 basic laws of motion, and from them generated a whole deductive system. But he began with the observations. Empiricist philosophers agreed. If we want to know about the world, they argued, we have to start with our experience of the world, and that occurs through the medium of the senses. Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, with increasing rigor, demanded a real-world connection for knowledge. Nothing, they would conclude, is in the mind that was not first in the senses. As acupuncturist Diane Connolly points out, there's a real temptation to reach conclusions without paying attention to what's right in front of us. It's critical to regain the power of the senses.
I wanted to speak something of the notion of observer, because it's a very important piece of this way of looking at life. The observer, not a voyeur, really the presence of being with all the senses open. A lot this work is about recovering the senses that we see, that we hear, that we smell, that we feel, that we touch. And that in the being observer for the phenomenon of life. I have a patient who lost her eyesight. She's in her 80s. She lost her eyesight for a little bit. And I said to her, Martha, do you want your eyesight back? And I thought, what a really dumb question to ask. And then she said, no, it's not a dumb question. And I said, well, how come? She said, I don't know about having my sight back. And I said, how come, Martha? And she said, because of the arrogance of the sighted. And this recognition, the phenomenon of having vision, having sight, having eyes, having ears to hear with, noses to smell with, mouths to eat and to taste and to swallow and to be able to speak with, the whole of our sensory self, to be able to be present in life. So the observer is the presence of all of these senses, present to the phenomenon that life is, before any conclusions we draw about it. And so this notion that here we are, being present for the phenomenon, when we wake up in the morning and recognize here we are recurring in these bodies one more day in creation, what do we say? What observer are we? Are we observer for the phenomenon and the whole, you could say the saint, the holy? Are we actually drawing conclusions already and sort of closing down the possibilities, closing down the phenomenon before we even breathe into it and recognize the wonder of it all?
What we're experiencing can be quite different from our idea of what we're experiencing. Two people can be weeding a garden. One suffers while the other has a calming, meditative experience. The power of the senses Diane Connolly speaks about is the power of direct observation of what is happening before we supply an interpretation for it. Deduction can result in logical impasses like the mind-body problem. And induction, which depends on the senses, leads at best to probability. Knowledge based on sense experience has the advantage of putting us in direct contact with the world we want to know about, but it relies on a changing world and on our somewhat unreliable senses. Fortunately, deduction and induction are not the only two choices. Intuition has been devalued by logicians and by hard empiricists, but it has always been the source of knowledge for poets and mystics. Insights that come in a flash often make their way into cultural wisdom in the form of proverbs. The American statesman and scientist Benjamin Franklin, through his alter ego, Poor Richard, gave us many proverbs that seem intuitively true. A stitch in time saves 9. Fish and visitors smell in 3 days. When the well is dry, they know the worth of water. Most of us have heard these or others, such as what goes around comes around. The question is, do they constitute knowledge? As a rule, our Western culture insists on either logic or empirical evidence as proof. When we try to escape from the egocentric predicament, reason and the senses have seemed to be our most reliable tools. As Descartes learned, however, solving one problem deductively often leads to another. And all of us have had the experience of having our senses fooled by optical illusions or other tricks. Which of these lines is longer? Because of surrounding cues, one of these appears much longer than the other, but actually both lines are of equal length. If we insist on either logic or direct sense experience, we may miss other possibilities for knowledge, especially the all-at-once certainty of intuition that scientists such as Einstein came to respect. As we turn to other cultures, keep in mind the role of deduction and induction in the Western world, as well as the somewhat grudging place granted to intuition.
Where do you want to go?
I am going to UCLA Med School.
Where do you want to go?
The Great Barrier Reef.
Where do you want to go?
I want to go beyond the imagination.
At Orange Coast College, we offer small class sizes, more than 130 career programs, and university transfer programs to help prepare you for success. Wherever you want to go, we'll help you get there. Call Orange Coast College today.
Time to cast your ballots. Election time is here, and Real Orange is once again presenting a live election coverage special. We'll bring you constantly updated results on all the measures, propositions, and major candidates of this election season as they come in. And we'll get commentary from leaders on both sides of the aisle. With so much to see, you won't want to miss this Real Orange election special. Starting tonight at 6:30 on KOCE.
All over America, there are buildings in the shape of something.
The Big Muskie was put up in 1978.
And you'd be amazed how many people come through town just to see the ketchup bottle.
And I think people love something that really gives the place a stamp that makes it look different.
This is all what they call, I believe, roadside architecture.
I think people like outrageous things.
It's that curiosity that we all have.
We call it a program about unusual buildings and other roadside stuff.
Wednesday at 9 on KOCE. Travel host and renowned guidebook author Rick Steves is coming to KOCE to share lessons he's learned from a lifetime of travel. See Rick Steves in person during a 90-minute smart travel lecture on Friday, December 1st at the KOCE studios in Huntington Beach. This is your chance to learn all the latest tips from Rick on stretching your vacation dollar, avoiding crowds, eating and sleeping well, and packing smart. Tickets are just $50 per person or $25 for KOCE members and their families. Call 1-800-278-5050 or visit koce.org today. Earthquakes, floods, volcanoes, rockfalls, landslides. They make up some of the world's worst natural disasters. What causes these disasters, and what are we doing to prepare for them? What you'll find out will be ground-shaking. Watch Disaster Detectives. Coming November 22nd on KOCE. Expand your mind with Orange County Public Television, KOCE, and KOCE-DT Digital Television. The tendency to pit logic and empirical evidence against intuitive knowledge may be a peculiarly Western one. Instead of posing an either-or choice, the issue may be deciding
which questions lend themselves to logic, which to empirical observation, and which to intuition. As psychologist Karina Golden explains, if we follow this path, our conclusion may be both and instead of either or.
We have a lot of people who feel that what is real is what we can experience through the senses. And there are others who feel that there are other ways of knowing reality. Carl Jung had a theory of psychological types where he talked about a spectrum where on the one hand you have sensation types, who are people who experience the world through their senses. They tend to be very linear in the way that they think. They tend to be people who have very good sense of direction. They follow the signs along the way. They know the trail and can easily find their way back. And then we have on the other end of the spectrum what he calls people who are intuitive. And these are people who don't necessarily go by things that they experience through the five senses, but more on hunches and feelings, not emotional feelings, but a sensation within themselves that this is the right direction to go, this is the right path to take. And people who have a strong intuitive sense will often say that if they follow their intuition, it will lead them to where it is that they need to go. People who are strong sensation types do not understand this, and so oftentimes we have a lack of communication between these two different ways of seeing the world. And I think what Jung would recommend is that the sensation types learn to listen to their hunches, and the intuitive types need to pay more attention to the world around them. As far as the sensations that they experience. I think what he was really saying is that we need to have a holistic approach. The sense of either or will never really give us an answer. The answer is really both.
Suppose we had a broader range of choices. Would we feel more confused or more certain about what we know? Here's a Taoist story to illustrate the value of intuitive knowledge. Duke Huan was engaged in study, while a wheelwright in the yard was engaged in making a wheel.
What is that you are reading?
The wisdom of the great masters.
Are they dead?
Yes, of course they are dead.
Then you are only reading the dirt they have left behind.
What an insolent remark. You insult the great thinkers who have gone before us. What can you possibly mean by this insult?
Well, most of what I know about making wheels, I can't explain, even to my son. When I die, he dies with me. Most of what I know matters when it's right. It just feels right. And I have no idea how to tell someone else what I know. So you see, when you read of dead philosophers, what you're reading is only part of what they could tell. In other words, the dirt they have left behind.
Try telling someone how to recognize true friendship or how to be happy, and you'll understand what the wheelwright meant. So much of what we know cannot be reasoned or sensed. We just know it. Does someone love you? Is this the right decision? Neither deduction nor induction seems appropriate in many cases. Even to a skeptical Westerner, what appears to be of no value can sometimes achieve its purpose. It's possible that knowledge about healing we once had has been devalued and lost. As Chinese poet Hilary Tom explains, her mother's reliance on Chinese medicine seems foolish, but the ordinary elements of the natural world she relies on for healing seem to be as effective as our more sophisticated pharmaceuticals.
If it tastes terrible, it must be good for you. My mother has Chinese medicines for everything. Viper soup for tetanus infection, musk for fainting, and cicada tea to cure cataracts. She believes rhino horn will stop nosebleeds and convulsions, that crushed dragon bone will stop a fit of hysteria and also help you sleep at night. She knows ginseng root and antelope horn lowers the blood pressure, prevents heart attacks, prolongs life, and makes men potent again. She talks of eating earthworm, scorpion, centipede, like we say spinach or carrot cake. When our sister had bronchitis, Mother scoured the town for crocodile meat and swears to this day it was her crocodile soup that cured her.
To think pragmatically for a moment, if it works, is it knowledge? Whenever I try to tell you what I've learned about life, however, there are two built-in problems, as Zen Buddhist Rich Walter points out. First, it's my experience, which you may or may not be willing to hear, and which may or may not translate into your life. And second, the part I can put into words is probably not the most important part.
One of the things that Zen tells us is don't depend upon words or letters. Don't depend upon words or letters. Don't depend upon what I'm saying to you. If I were a Roshi, if I were a Zen master, and words of great wisdom were dropping from my lips, don't depend upon them. If you came in possession of ancient scrolls, if you came into possession of translations of various sutras, that is sermons, and there are thousands of them, don't depend upon what they say. Why? Because clearly, whenever you reduce something to words, you've left out a whole bunch of stuff. For instance, when you can describe me by saying, you know, I'm an old man with hair on my face, but you've left out, I think, the most important things about me, but yet that is a description of me, and you might be able to recognize me in the hall. It doesn't say don't use words or letters. It says don't depend upon them. Well, then what do we depend upon? What did Buddha say? Buddha said we depend upon our own selves. And the only dependable thing we have is what comes from inside. And it comes from inside me, and yours comes from inside you. And when I write down wise and pithy sayings for your edification, you cannot depend upon these things for two reasons. One, they're my wise and pithy sayings, not yours. Number two, as soon as I write them down, I've already reduced the content of them from where they came. They're less than. The words and the sentences are very substantially and importantly less than what I have inside me.
What you need to know is inside you, and what is inside me can often not be reduced to words. The mind-body problem we discussed in the last lesson arises out of a distinctively Western concept of a person that reaches all the way back to Plato. If we are composed of a superior mind and an inferior body, and if mind is superior to body, we have the image of a divided self. This leads some of us to live almost entirely in our minds, neglecting to eat, cheating sleep, forgetting we have bodies at all until they force our attention by breaking down. This kind of division is less likely to occur in cultures that have a more integrated concept of a human being. Among the Arkan of West Africa, for instance, there is a three-part concept of a person. But as we saw with the Western philosopher Anne Finch Conway, the three parts are on a continuum that ranges from fully material, bloodline, clan identity, and individual personality, to quasi-material, life force or spirit. There is no separate immaterial mind, such as the one Descartes described, so there's no mind-body problem. In this conception of a person, the material elements come from the parents, whereas the okra is a spark of the divine, created by God and imprinted with a plan for that spirit's life. After death, the okra becomes an ancestor in the spirit world, but it remains quasi-material. In a culture such as this one, all parts of a human person are presumed to work in harmony with all other parts, and knowledge is understood to arise from a variety of sources. There's the embodied knowledge that is preserved in proverbs, which must be both logical and experience-based. There's the direct knowledge of the natural world that comes through the senses, and there's the intuitive knowledge of what must be done that is neither purely logical nor purely empirical. Dawn Barnes recalls an experience during her childhood in Liberia when the problem was who knew best how to cure malaria, her father, a Western-trained physician, or her grandmothers who just knew what to do.
The whole story begins with me at a very young age, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and I contracted this malaria fever. And malaria is very widespread in West Africa and Liberia, where I grew up. It was not uncommon, but one of the fears is that you would get this very, very high fever, which then, if it wasn't controlled, it could lead to all kinds of complications and even death. And my father was a Western-trained physician. He had gone to medical school in the United States and done his specialty in surgery and everything, and returned to Liberia to practice medicine. And so, of course, when I got this fever, he thought he was very much in control and that he knew how to treat this, and he would treat it in the traditional Western way of treating malaria, which was to use quinine and to give aspirin and things like that to reduce fever. Well, after several days and this very high fever and no change in my condition, there were, of course, my 2 grandmothers standing by, watching and trying to be very respectful of this Western-trained doctor who should know what he was doing. But after I started to hallucinate and get to what they felt was a dangerous stage in the fever where I could be damaged and even die, they just stepped in and they said, look, thank you very much. You've done what you can. Now let us try our way of curing this. And what they proceeded to do was to gather these herbs known as the fever leaf, and according to my mother, they would dampen the leaf in a water and alcohol type solution and then plaster it against my skin and wrap me in blankets. And each time that the leaves would dry, they would apply a new solution. And they repeated this until all of a sudden this very high fever broke and I recovered fully. And one of the things that has always been very interesting is that the fear was, having sustained such a high fever for such a long period of time, I would suffer brain damage or some other kind of defect as a result of the malaria fever. But to the best of my knowledge, that did not happen. And so I think that demonstrates in a very clear way a different way of knowing, a different way of curing. There's a respect that can exist, but at the same time, there are ways of curing that are known to be effective given the culture that you find it in.
If you've ever known something with this kind of certainty, you'll understand the power of Dawn Barnes' story. Perhaps the healing properties of fever leaves cannot be logically or empirically verified. Still, they cure fevers, and some people know this to be true. As we observed in the second lesson, how we think about knowing will have much to do with whether we see ourselves as separate from, connected to, or merged with what we want to know. The model of Western scientific knowledge has tended toward a fairly rigid separation between knowing subject and known object. The ideal is that of the detached observer who watches through a two-way mirror or from behind a tree and avoids interacting with or influencing the object of knowledge. Intuitive knowing has often been relegated to second-class status or discounted altogether. Real knowledge, we've seemed to say, presupposes distance. As we've seen, however, Asian and African cultures are often somewhat more tolerant of and respectful toward more intuitive ways of knowing, even when the goal is knowledge of the world. Another group that honors intuitive knowledge is artists. We've listened to poet Lee Young Lee speak about the condition of knowing from which he writes. Visual artists, too, believe they have something to tell us, something they know that may be communicated best through images. In the Western world, we take literacy for granted and assume that most knowledge will be communicated through the written word. This assumption cannot be made in most of the rest of the world, and it could not be made in the Western world during the Middle Ages. When most people are illiterate, a culture must find other ways to bring knowledge to them. Artist Ron Roberson reminds us of the real purpose of stained glass windows.
In ancient times, artists were very important in transmitting religious values to the public. And of course, that's why, even though in Christianity, for instance, there were prohibitions against graven images and idols, in fact, the early church did make a decision that they would allow there to be these images because they understood that one way to communicate values, if you will, to a public that's illiterate is through images. And I think that the capacity for art to do that still exists today, probably just as great. And of course, because we have not an illiterate but a non-literate public today, if in fact someone were interested in transmitting those values, religious values, what a perfect medium to do it in. And in some ways that's happening more through things other than traditional visual arts. If you turn on some of the stations that have religious shows, you know, the media is being used very effectively, if you will, to communicate those values orally, you know, through and visually through TV shows and radio shows. And certainly the visual arts has the capacity to play a very strong part in that. Probably one of the reasons that it hasn't played a stronger part is the tradition of religious art, in fact, has been lost, especially in the West, and especially in the United States. But Protestants, from the very beginning, were suspicious of religious art. And so I think because there's such a very strong Protestant contingent in the United States, that there's still some suspicion associated with art, and suspicion about artists and what they do. But it is very clear that the visual arts certainly have that capacity to speak to people. People are looking for something beyond themselves and are not quite certain what it is they want. Some of them seem very clearly to be looking to art as one avenue for that search for truth. And I know that's true when I go to art shows and I see that they're packed with people who can't possibly be there out of pure interest. Because sometimes the subjects are fairly arcane subjects, Franz Hals. Even the Greek women's show, which I don't think is intrinsically uninteresting. I think it's an interesting subject, but it still doesn't explain why there are lines of people in a waiting list to get in to see a show like that. So people are looking for art, I think, to give them a glimpse at something finer, looking for a revelation. They're looking for in some cases, even a spiritual experience. And there have been artists, even modern artists like Mark Rothko, for instance, who have been very interested in creating a foil for people to have such religious experiences. So there's a real untapped area there for the visual arts, and somebody, I'm sure, will tap it to tap into its ability to be a revelatory medium for people who are looking for that kind of experience. And certainly it's not a new job for art. In fact, it's one of the oldest things that it's ever done is perform that function in societies.
We're still learning from images, of course, although most of them today appear on television or movie screens. If what we need to know is how to be a fully realized human being, or how to live with others in the world, there are many paths to this knowledge. Reading and study, for instance, require time, patience, and literacy. For those who have the skills and make learning a priority, the rewards are great. Wise people from the past and present can speak to us about what they've learned. Even if the best part cannot be communicated in words, some of what they write will reach us. But what about those who cannot or do not take the time to read and study? Are they condemned to ignorance? Or is there another way to learn what they need to know? Artist Ron Roberson believes the artist, through the power of the visual image, has a very important role to play.
One concern of mine is that if you think of who really is using visual images very effectively, it's people in advertising. And it's interesting just how sophisticated that use is, how advertisers use images to shape opinion, to shape perception, to create, if you will, a consciousness, true or not. And in many ways, that's what artists used to do, used to be involved in. I think once artists get out of the world of images, to some extent, they lose their ability to do that. And one interest of mine is reclaiming that power to shape perceptions, to shape attitudes through visual images. And I think people are, one of the problems, of course, is that people are bombarded by visual images. We get up in the morning and they hit us all day, they hit us to the last thing in the evening. And one important lesson or talent that we need to survive in the world is the ability to click it off. And so we only see a small portion of all that imagery that's being directed at us. And so the clever advertiser is the one that's able to cut through our indifference and make us look at what they have to say. I think where that's significant to artists is that art also can get filtered out the same way those other images. And I think that if an artist really is interested in communicating some kind of content to an audience, that the artist has got to find a way to cut through and to make that audience see their work. And if innovation is of some value, I think that's the main value, is that when people have seen 1 million landscapes, when they just see another landscape, it's just, okay, that's a landscape, well, I know what that's all about. Or they see another portrait, well, okay, that's a portrait, I know what that's all about. So I think that an artist who is dealing in visual imagery has quite a challenge to give the audience something that will make them pause, that will make them look, that will bring them in. And I think that's a real challenge for artists. Unfortunately, there's a lot of cheap shot ways to do that, and you see that all the time in visual art. Artists who simply want to gross the public out, if you will, or just do something weird to get people's attention. And of course, the problem there is that you've got the attention getter, but then you don't have anything else. I think the real problem is to have something that grabs your public and brings them in, and then there's something there for them to get once they come in.
If nothing else, images let us know what stirs and intrigues us, what has the power to engage us in thought or action. Deduction, induction, and intuition all have their place. In the Western world, we don't want our pharmacists or auto mechanics relying too much on intuition, although a shaman might be convinced that only intuition could lead him or her to the right medicine for you. And sometimes only intuition gives us the insight we need to fix something. Whether we reason logically from premise to conclusion, or rely on observation and experimentation, or gratefully accept a flash of intuition, our goal is arriving at the truth. In our next lesson, we consider tests for truth and how they work.
I'm transferring to State University in just 14 months.
I'm completing my degree online, on my schedule.
I'm completing my degree halfway around the world.
I've always had a love for the arts.
Coastline Community College offers something for everyone, from accelerated degree programs to online courses. We have day and evening classes and satellite campuses throughout Orange County. Coastline Community College, accessible anytime, anywhere.
It was fought in the streets, at lunch counters, in schools. It was fought for America, to be America.
It was a feeling of pride and hope.
These were America's civil rights years. American Experience presents the long-awaited return of a series that's a must-see for every American. Eyes on the Prize.
Tonight at 8 on KOCE. Have an extra vehicle you don't need anymore? Donate it to KOCE. We'll arrange for vehicle pickup and for the title transfer. Your donation may even qualify for a tax deduction and will help fuel the great programs you enjoy on KOCE, your public television station. Donating a vehicle to KOCE is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Call our toll-free vehicle donation line at 1-877-KOCE-123 or visit our website at www.koce.org/cars.
Hi, this is Jose Molina. As a young boy, I was very lucky to have the love and support of my father and brothers. But not all boys have the positive male role model in their life. That's why I've teamed up with Big Brother, Big Sister of Orange County.
There are currently hundreds of boys right here in Orange County who are waiting for a friend like you to come along and make a difference in their lives.
Step up to the plate and become a big brother today.
Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Orange County. Be a friend. Be a mentor. Be a big.
Santo Domingo Blues, a compelling story of singer-songwriter Luis Vargas and bachata, the guitar blues of Santo Domingo. Bachata is now eclipsing rap as the music of choice for Latino youth on the streets of New York and has become an emblem of national pride for Dominican immigrants. Santo Domingo Blues, the triumph of a poor people's music over censorship and prejudice.
Tuesday at 10 on KOCE. Expand your mind with Orange County Public Television, KOCE, and KOCE-DT Digital Television.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If you've ever appeared in court, you may have been asked this question, but how can you be sure you recognize the truth? Philosophers have devised truth tests to help us distinguish truth from falsity and to point out the dangers of accepting truth claims too uncritically. If the police arrive at your apartment or stop your car and present you with a warrant, they're asserting they have evidence that something is true and want to make a more complete search, or they have evidence you're guilty of a crime and want to arrest you. In philosophy, a warrant works in a very similar way. Warrants provide evidence or other justification that something is true. The interesting thing about warrants, though, is that they're neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition for truth. A necessary condition is one without which something cannot happen. Heat is a necessary condition for fire. It's not a sufficient condition, however. That is, heat alone will not create a fire. We also need a combustible substance, something that will burn. Although true statements are usually warranted, there's evidence or justification for making them, this is not universally the case. Warrantability can be present without truth, and truth can be present without warrantability. Let's look at some examples. A few centuries ago, before Copernicus convinced the scientific community that the Earth revolves around the sun, many people thought they had a warrant for the revolution of the sun around the Earth. After all, every morning the sun rose in the east, traveled across the sky all day, peaking overhead at noon, and every evening it set again in the west. What could be clearer? Both sense experience and common sense confirmed that the Earth stood still and the sun moved. With the benefit of Copernicus's mathematics, however, we now believe that, despite the apparent warranty, it's not true that the sun revolves around the Earth. So warrantability alone is not sufficient for truth. It's also possible that you're the best cook or tennis player in your college, or the tallest person in your neighborhood, but you probably don't have a warranty to that effect. In this case, warrantability is possible, but not present. So it's not a necessary condition for truth, meaning we can have truth without it. Most of the time, however, warrantability is our starting point. As we've observed in the last few lessons, the Western world has a strong preference for logical and empirical warrants. As Rich Walter observes, these are useful and clearly have their place, but it may be helpful to balance them with the interior warranties that intuition can provide.
Western civilization somehow got on a track in which reason, logic, linear thinking, discursive thinking, which is very useful. I don't want to put down logic, reason, or discursive thought, but it seemed to overwhelm every activity that we did, and that's because it's been so successful. It was successful. Aristotle made it successful. Even Pythagoras, who was about as mysterious as you could get, had this idea that there was a logic to things, and that the best way, maybe not the only way, but certainly the best way that things could be described or dealt with in the world, real things, psychological things, social things, was if you reasoned about them. In the East, it took a different tack. And for some reason equally obscure, it was not logic and reason, with the exception of Confucius. It was not logic and reason that came ascendant, but it was intuition. Intuition. Intuition means to be taught from inside. Okay? That the solution to problems could be a proper, a useful solution to problems could occur from within a person, from their connecting with other individuals in the world. The Zen view is that I won't exactly say a plague on both your houses, but the Zen view is that there must be a balance. This is also the Buddhist view. There must be a balance between these two things. Many, many important problems can be solved by reason and logic and the application of reason. Many other problems cannot be solved by reason. They have to be solved by empathy, by intuition, by compassion, and by squishy things like that. And there has to be a balance. And what Zen is about is trying to maintain that balance between the rational and what you might call the irrational, between the intuitive and reason.
If we respect both reason and intuition, we may be able to call on each at appropriate moments. In the Western world, there are 3 traditional tests for truth, each based on a theory of truth. The correspondence test insists something is true if and only if it corresponds with a fact or state of affairs. The statement or proposition that water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level is true only if this is the case in the world. This truth test has a highly empirical flavor and is useful in establishing truth in the sciences. The coherence test of truth looks for logical consistency and coherence or sticking together among a group of related propositions. This test is applied to theories made up of many individual statements and considers the truth of the entire system rather than the truth of an individual proposition. The pragmatic test of truth asserts that what's true is what works. Abstract theories of truth have little relevance to this truth test, which looks for predictability. What's true is what tells us what's likely to happen next. To speak very broadly, each of these truth tests can be related to one of the knowledge theories we've discussed in the last few lessons. The correspondence test uses induction, depending on observation of the world. In the coherence test, it is the deductive processes of logical consistency and internal coherence that make a mathematical theory true or a defendant either guilty or not guilty. With the pragmatic test, we're closer to the world of intuition. If you wish to test my statement that I love you for truth, you will make an intuitive assessment based in part on how I behave and what you think I'm likely to do in any given situation. If my words say I love you, while my actions indicate indifference or even abuse, my statement fails the pragmatic test of truth. When we consider some of our academic fields of study, it's immediately apparent that being able to establish truth is extremely important. If we wish to understand the truth about the past, we'll turn to the study of history. Without a lot of thought, we can see some obvious problems. To begin with, if all the eyewitnesses to an event are dead, how do we determine what actually happened? We may have written accounts, but can we trust any one person's observation to be objectively accurate? If you've ever been in an automobile accident or had a disagreement about who agreed to do what, you know that each of us has our own interpretation. A slaveholder and a slave would have vastly different stories to tell about slavery. As historian Joe Mitchell points out, it's each generation's task to figure out for itself which voices to listen to in assessing the past.
History is not a static discipline. There is constant need to reinterpret the past to suit the needs of the present generation. And there are some very good reasons for this. The first reason is, of course, that new sources of information can be discovered which will alter the way we look and we interpret history. Secondly, there are entirely new tools that are available to a historian that will make not only the historian's job easier, but will bring to light more information in a quicker period of time. For example, carbon dating makes it possible now to date certain information which would be important to a historian. Also, the computer has already revolutionized historiography by making it possible for the historian to become aware of large amounts of information that hitherto would have been impossible to put together. However, thirdly, and most importantly, a reason that historians must reinterpret the past would be to make sure that the past has some meaning and relevance to that generation. It doesn't necessarily mean that the history changes, the dates change, the people change. They remain the same, but basically it's how we look at them and how we assess them after they have occurred. For example, when I was in college in the 1950s, the general historical interpretation of John Brown was that he was a fanatical radical who helped to cause the Civil War. And it was a definite impression given at that time by historians, most historians, that John Brown was a person that history could have done without. On the other hand, in the 1960s, with the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement and an awareness of African American history, people began to look at John Brown not so much as a radical fanatic who caused the Civil War, but as a freedom fighter. Now, whose interpretation is the one that would be acceptable. And to the generation of the 1960s, John Brown certainly was a more admirable figure than he was to the generation of the 1950s. This does not necessarily mean that if a new interpretation comes in to being, that the old one is discarded. One of the interesting things about history is that you have the opportunity to play one of these interpretations off against each other to always seek what a historian always attempts to seek, and that is the truth.
The context of the present influences how we judge the people and events of the past. In fact, there is an even more basic problem. Labels that historians place on past eras may be quite meaningful to us as organizing and explanatory principles, but we must remember that those labels, such as the Middle Ages, did not exist in the past. People were aware, as we are aware, only of their daily lives, and not of our eventual assessment of the times in which they lived. Joe Mitchell explains.
The English writer Philip Guadella once said that one of the curious things about history is that it really happened, but while it was happening, no one really understood its significance. And if we look at certain examples in history, we can certainly see the validity of his statement. For example, a person living in France in the Middle Ages was not aware that they were living in the Middle Ages. It just wasn't in their ability to be able to discern that. Consequently, someone living in Renaissance Florence was not aware that they were living in the middle of the dawn of a new era. They simply knew they were living in an era where things were quite different, but they didn't quite have the perspective that we have today. It's taken historians of this generation and past generations to even give places like the Middle Ages and the Renaissance their actual names.
Assigning labels helps us understand major turning points in history, and each generation, it seems, must reinterpret the past for itself. From John Brown, dangerous fanatic, to John Brown, freedom fighter, the process of historical revisionism continues. The historian must be a kind of detective, sifting for clues and being suspicious even of his own subject. As David Levering Lewis, biographer of W.E.B. Du Bois, founder of the Niagara Movement, what would later become the NAACP, points out, historical figures can sometimes set traps for future biographers.
I probably, in the personal domain, though, am making a contribution because there has been an iconic texture to much of the appreciation of Du Bois. And he turns out to have been quite a complex man who knew that he would have biographers and therefore set traps for them. He was a master at reconstructing history so plausibly that you never suspected that, in fact, these things have not that he reports, if not fanciful, are in fact manufactured for the purpose of enhancing his posterity. I don't mean to suggest that he was in any way fraudulent, but that Du Bois...
Self-mythologizing, would you say?
Yes, yes. And so I've been especially attentive to that aspect of his life, and I hope I've unmasked a great deal of the stage management of his life.
Both Du Bois and Lewis have versions of the significance of his life. Which is the more accurate one? In some ways, we are the least able to assess the meaning of our own lives, what we do, and what happens to us. We're too close to the events, and we lack the perspective of an outside observer. On the other hand, we have access to a great deal more information and to first-person experience. Finding the truth in history is not an easy process, and Professor Lewis thinks the biographer must be ruthless in the pursuit of truth.
I wrote what was the first scholarly biography of Martin Luther King many years ago, about 25 years ago, and there were a number of aspects of the life that I couldn't say a great deal more about simply because the documentary evidence was not then forthcoming. But I had my suspicions, and I felt that I needed to hint that there were in his life revelations to come which would be troubling, and so they have come. And if I were to have written that book later, when the documentation was to hand, I think I would have explored it fully, because I would have believed, as with Jefferson, as with any figure, that the accomplishment, the public accomplishment, is, after all, what is significant.
The historian must be as accurate as possible, but, Joe Mitchell warns, we make a great mistake if we look to history only for accuracy.
History can never be like a photograph, a true representation of what something is. History is more like a painting in which it is up to the historian to provide the colors, the hues, and the tones, and the actual meaning of what that painting represents.
At its most basic level, truth rests on the meaning behind the words I use. As linguistic analysts point out, everything is a text. Books and magazines are obvious texts, but so are movies, TV shows, and even ordinary conversations. And every text is shaped by a whole constellation of assumptions that are part of the constructed meaning of the text, but remain mostly invisible. Suppose I say I can't wait to move out of my parents' house and get a taste of real freedom. My words suggest that freedom is a highly desirable thing, that it cannot be achieved while living at home, that living independently is a desirable and socially acceptable goal. All of these assumptions may make sense among middle-class people living in late 20th century America. The hidden meanings, however, might cause real problems for an Asian teenager trying to translate them, or for an old African woman who hears them spoken in a story about America, or for the parents of the speaker. If we're after truth, we must deconstruct the constructed meanings of texts, peel away the assumptions of race, social class, gender, culture, religion, ethnicity they contain, or at least reveal them by bringing them to the surface. All writers speak from the circumstances of their own lives, and we, their readers, must be aware that what they say is not only universal, but also particular. Assumptions about the roles of women, about the place certain races should occupy in society, about the duties appropriate to various social classes, will occur as subtexts in whatever we read. We need to continually question the text to make sure we know what assumptions are being made beneath the writer's words. There is a sense in which writers attempt to both conceal and reveal through what they write. As novelist Mary Gordon explains, some secrets can be told while others cannot.
With autobiographical writing, in a way, one is always in bad faith because you're still only telling what you want to tell. And who knows what's being hidden? Who knows what, in fact, might be the true, dark, unsayable, unbearable story? So I wasn't frightened. Also, I think the way that these secrets
drive us are as metaphors. And I think there are two things that have driven my work that are rooted in biography, two metaphors, which is early loss. And my mother, who was handicapped, gave me the image of the brokenness of the body. And that's not a secret. I can talk about that. The exploration will come, it seems to me, in traveling through these dark, labyrinthian metaphors. And I think because they are rather large metaphors, loss and brokenness, I probably have quite a long way to travel in them.
Language is the medium writers have, and if they use it skillfully and honestly, truth has at least the possibility of emerging. Sometimes the most accurate way to tell something is not the way of literal truth. Although poets use events from their own lives as inspiration, they don't feel compelled to restrict themselves to the exact details as they may have occurred. In the pursuit of truth, speaking with imagination will often be more effective. In this poem about the moment when a baby's head emerges, the event called crowning, poet Linda Paston describes a universal female experience and is surprised, as she tells Lucille Clifton, to find herself faulted for being less than literally accurate.
Notes from the delivery room. Strapped down, victim in an old comic book, I have been here before, this place where pain winces off the walls like too bright light. Bear down, a doctor says, foreman to sweating laborer, but this work, this forcing of one life from another, is something that I signed for at a moment when I would have signed anything. Babies should grow in fields, common as beets or turnips. They should be picked and held, root end up, soil spilling from between their toes, and how much easier it would be later returning them to earth. Bear up, bear down, the audience grows restive, and I'm a new magician who can't produce the rabbit from my swollen hat. She's crowning, someone says, but there is no one royal here. Just me, quite barefoot, greeting my barefoot child.
Oh, I love that poem. The whole feeling of language, of making turns on language, and I'm not sure that younger poets now think about language in that way. Reading that, and this was a while back, I remember thinking, well, of course, children are barefoot when they're born. It wouldn't occur to me to say that they are, in fact, barefoot. And just the turns on crowning, that's wonderful.
It's interesting. I read that poem a number of years ago at a writers' conference that I teach in the summer, and afterwards a number of women wanted to discuss with me their delivery room experiences, which was fine, but they were quite upset to learn that this really hadn't specifically been my delivery room experience. And when I had children, it seemed in many ways different, and I think many people don't realize that a poem isn't strict autobiography. It's sort of autobiography with a twist. It's fiction to a great degree.
As long as it's, I tell my students, as long as it's true, that it's fact, doesn't really matter, but it's very hard for them to understand that truth and fact may in fact
women were angry at me.
Oh, really?
Because it hadn't been literal truth, and I think I quoted Frost, who said, poets lie to tell the truth.
Truth matters, and we do become angry when we feel someone is not telling the truth. As we've seen, however, determining what is the truth is quite a bit more complicated than it seems at first glance. Warranties are nice. They can be very useful in proving to yourself and others that what you say is true. However, keep in mind that warranties do not guarantee truth, and the absence of a warranty does not necessarily mean what you claim is not true. Truth seems to require something more, and we test for it in varying ways depending on the culture in which we live. Deductive, inductive, and intuitive approaches can all be used to test for truth. Indeed, depending on the situation, you may find one or the other of these more useful. Some truth tests rely on correspondence between statements about the world and facts in the world. Others look for coherence and consistency. Still others consider only results. Depending on your cultural experience, words may be very useful or merely roadblocks on the road to truth. Let's turn our attention now to the pursuit of truth in the cultures of Asia and Africa.
I'm transferring to State University in just 14 months.
I'm completing my degree online, on my schedule.
I'm completing my degree halfway around the world.
I've always had a love for the arts.
Coastline Community College offers something for everyone, from accelerated degree programs to online courses. We have day and evening classes and satellite campuses throughout Orange County. Coastline Community College, accessible anytime, anywhere.
From our studio in Huntington Beach, Real Orange brings you Orange County. From along the coast to our university campuses, to the fashionable fairs and marketplaces, on our congested freeways, or in our open stadiums. Orange County has experienced the highs, the lows, the humorous, and the exhilarating. And Real Orange has always been there to experience it with you. With Ed Arnold and police and the Real Orange team. The county, the people, the news. That's Real Orange. Tonight at 6:30 on KOCE.
Life in Orange County was destined to change radically after the arrival of the automobile. People quickly fell in love with the newfangled contraptions, which brought exciting and unprecedented mobility. As automobile travel grew in popularity, there was increasing demand for more and better roads, which in turn spurred development throughout the county. One especially amusing incident involving the public fascination with automobiles occurred in 1921. That year, a famous silent movie queen named Bibi Daniels was arrested in Santa Ana for speeding 15 miles an hour in a 10-mile-an-hour zone. The case drew national attention when a no-nonsense judge ordered Daniels to spend 5 days in the Orange County Jail. The sentence yielded a publicity bonanza, however, as local merchants contributed furnishings that transformed her cell into a luxury suite. Daniel's press agent also saw to it that the star did not suffer from a lack of entertainment during her brief incarceration.
Expand your mind with Orange County Public Television, KOCE, and KOCE.
As we saw in the last lesson, it's dangerous to have a too narrow definition of truth. As any experienced liar can tell you, it's quite possible to deceive while making limited but accurate statements. To reach the truth, we may have to expand our definition and even our awareness. To begin, we might want to think about the ways in which our assumptions can narrow the field, giving us access only to partial truth. As Diane Connolly explains, where we focus our attention determines what we see.
That old saying, when the pickpocket sees the saint on the road, all the pickpocket sees are the saint's pockets. It's really a good one, because in the presence of us beings of the human sort with the privilege of speaking and listening, and by speaking and listening we build the world, like Heidegger said, building a dwelling thinking, so that we can learn to dwell together ever more potently with some possibility of peace and possibilities. And so this notion of the pickpocket seeing only the saint's pockets is crucial, because we've all got pickpocket conversations. We've all got conversations that you could say are conclusions that don't allow us to see the saint, don't allow us to see the whole. And so part of this way of looking at life is to, what conversations do we beings of the human sort need to create in order to see the saint, to see the whole, to see the holy, you could say, moment by moment by moment. And so that nothing is left out in that seeing of the whole. Everything is a part of the yoo-hoo, pay attention. The saint is present here, the whole is present here. And if I've got pickpocket conversations going on, I might very well be missing the saint. So part of the training of the students in this particular way of looking at life, in this particular medicine, is to actually call them to, okay, so what are your pickpocket conversations that might actually get in the way of seeing the saint, the patient who walks through the door, and the range of possibility that they are. Not what's wrong, how can we fix them? What's the possibility, and how can we create this? How can we dance together to show possibility? And there's one more piece that I want to make sure to say, and that is that this other little notion, the front of the hand, the back of the hand, goes with the yin-yang dance. It's said that my barn having burned to the ground, I can now see the moon. And so it's taking the, you could say it's pointing to the sufferings that we must bear, because sometimes the barn burns in some way or other. And then the question is, what's the strength that comes from that struggle? What's the moon that I can now see, having my barn having burned? And that's not to say that I should love my barn having burned. It's simply to say that too is a part of the dance. Now, what shows as a result of that, and how do we rebuild together maybe some of the barns that have burned, and or some other possibilities?
If our mental conversations are too small, we may miss the fullness of truth in any given situation. And insisting on logical consistency or empirical correspondence may shut us off from many of the things most worth knowing. In Buddhism, and especially in Zen, intuition will be our most reliable guide. If our life work is seeing reality as it is, knowing the truth is of vital importance. However, only direct experience of reality can lead to truth. Words only get in the way. In an important sense, Rich Walter explains, words and concepts get between us and the direct experience of reality.
How do I become enlightened? Well, the Zen people pointed out that the instant that you try to become enlightened, you're moving in the wrong direction. This is not something that can be established through reason. You can't become awake. Buddha did not become awake by sitting and reasoning about this. Buddha sat and something happened inside him, and we don't know what, but it was not certainly a line of reasoning. It was not a series of if-then propositions, if this, then that. There was no syllogisms, I guess, involved. It's difficult, it's very difficult for Westerners to understand this, because so much of our society, so much of our culture and civilization for 1,000 years has been based on logic and reason.
Reason and logic won't lead to enlightenment, and no one can teach you about Zen, not even the Buddha, because it's not teachable. The truth must be experienced individually and directly. Once it is, you'll see things differently, and you won't need an outside warranty. You'll know what you know. If we can't reason our way to truth, and Zen is very clear that we can't, then how can we reach it? One method used in Zen is the koan, or paradox. Koans are designed to be thought stoppers that shatter our dependence on words and bring us into contact with what's real. The most famous of the koans, at least in the West, is this one. You know the sound of two hands clapping. What's the sound of one hand clapping? It seems obvious that no amount of step-by-step reasoning or evidence gathering will help us solve this koan. In fact, solve is probably the wrong word to use. Koans can be resolved only by breaking out of the confines of language and seeing things as they truly are. It helps to have what Zen practitioners call beginner's mind. Think about the first time you got behind the wheel of a car. All your senses were honed to sharpness. What you were about to do had your full attention. All of you was engaged in what you were about to do. If you've been driving for a while, most of what's required has probably reached the automatic pilot level. And you may feel comfortable listening to music, planning the rest of your day or evening, carrying on a conversation with a passenger, or even talking on a car phone while you drive. This may be okay where driving is concerned, but it's no way to live a life. Zen reminds us that this is just what most of us are doing, going through the motions and accepting a fiction of reality. What we need is the fresh vision that comes with beginner's mind, for that's the only way to see reality as it actually is. And how do we acquire beginner's mind? One of the best ways, Rich Walter suggests, is to sit every day in silent meditation, trying to still the mind, stop its word drunkenness, and focus on life.
Now, meditation is difficult. Meditation is a hard thing for me to describe because the word has been used by so many different kinds of people. For some people, meditation is simply sitting still for a length of time. For some people, meditation is sitting in a certain position for a long time, 45 minutes, an hour. For some people, meditation is thinking about one word or a short phrase. For some people, meditation is not thinking about anything. Some people meditate walking around. Some people can only meditate in a meditation room. Some people can meditate anywhere. Bodhidharma was the first one to point out that meditation is crucial, absolutely crucial, in understanding oneself and in understanding the universe. How come? Bodhidharma pointed out that fundamentally there is no difference between self and not self. This is one of the bases of Zen.
If you can empty your mind of thought, you may actually catch a glimpse of reality. And meditation can give you some control over what goes through your mind. If thoughts come in, observe them and invite them to leave. Gradually, you may become more skillful at reaching the state of openness and receptivity to life that's necessary for enlightenment, seeing reality as it is. If you've never done this before, spend 5 minutes trying not to think. Your goal is not to shut out the experience of life, so it's fine to hear the bird or the airplane. But try not to sing the words to a song, plan the rest of the day, worry about anything, or think beyond your 5 minutes. You may be surprised to discover how difficult it is to decide what you will and will not do with your mind. Once we've become experts at life, there's nothing it can teach us. Meditation helps us recapture the directness of children. The great arts of China, including flower arranging, calligraphy, and brush painting, are all designed to be done from beginner's mind. As we watch this artist at work, we see intense concentration and focus, as well as a free, almost playful spirit. Too much attention to technique can actually get in the way. Once basics have been mastered, the goal is to let go of conscious direction and be expressive in an open, childlike way. This is not at all the same thing as being childish, which implies immaturity and petulance. Instead, this is painting as if you're doing it for the first time, with the spontaneity and joy of a child. If you can remember your first experience with finger paints, you may be able to relate to this spirit of eager openness. Painting in this way can be an experience in meditation for the artist and for the viewer who approaches the painting with the same spirit. Writers, too, walk the edge between bare facts and imaginative meaning. It's their skillful negotiation of this balancing act that makes their work appealing. Here, poet Lee Young Lee talks with fellow poet Michael Collier about hearing language with beginner's mind and finding meaning even when a wall blocks you from hearing the actual words. Listen as he reads his poem, A Final Thing.
It's called A Final Thing. I am that last, that final thing, the body in a white sheet listening, the whole of me trained, curled like one great ear on a sound, a noise I know, a woman talking in another room, the woman I love. And though I can't hear her words, by their voicing, I can guess she is telling a story. Using a voice which speaks to another, weighted with that other's attention, and avowing it by deepening in intention. Rich with the fullness of what's declared, this voice points away from itself to some place in the hearer, sends the hearer back to himself to find what he knows. A saying full of hearing, a murmuring full of telling and compassion for the listener and for what's told, now interrupted by a second voice, thinner, higher, uncertain, querying, it seems, an invitation to be met, stirring anticipation, embodying incompletion of time and the day. My son, my firstborn, and his mother are involved in a story no longer only theirs, for I am implicated, all three of us now, clinging to expectancy, riding sound and air. Will my first morning of heaven be this? No, and this is not my last morning on earth. I am simply last in my house to waken, and the first sound I hear is the voice of one I love, speaking to one we love. I hear it through the bedroom wall. Something, someday, I'll close my eyes to recall. And I'm really interested in, how do I say this? You know, not so much the particular stories that are being told, but I feel as if that there's a greater telling that goes on, like in the universe or something, that there's a telling voice that is telling all the time. And I guess what I want to say is everything is discourse, you know, everything. I mean, leaves, trees, clouds, mountains, it's all discourse. Not only language, you know, or we can say everything is language, you know, this table, these cups, you know. Everything is language to me. And I'm curious about what that other language is. And sometimes it's clearer, I think, when you don't hear the words because of a wall, let's say, that separates you, but you hear the intonation of the voice, and you know you're in the presence of a telling, right? But not necessarily what's being told. So it's that telling voice, the murmuring, that I am really just in love with.
It's the telling voice in the universe that speaks the truth. In the right frame of mind, we may be open to hearing it. Among the Ewe people of West Africa, we find the creativity or Nyano test of truth. We might think of it as an extension of the pragmatic test of truth we discussed in the last lesson. According to the Ewe creativity test of truth, however, not only must something work, it must also bear fruit. One way to command a person to speak the truth in Ewe is to say, do nyanono, meaning plant the truth. True statements will germinate, grow, bear fruit, whereas false statements will not. The Ewe language also has correspondence and coherence tests of truth. But since truth is believed to have the highest spiritual value, the creativity test provides an added dimension to the pragmatic test. In Li Young Lee's poem, the deep spoken language of the universe that he hears in murmurs of ordinary language passes the creativity test of truth. Suppose you decided to tell each potential romantic partner you loved them, whether or not you actually did. This strategy might work pragmatically in establishing an initial relationship, but it would certainly fail long-term as partners realized your declaration of love did not bear fruit. This fuller understanding of truth is rooted in practical concerns, as the pragmatic test is, and has the added dimension of using the generation of better life situations as a truth standard. In this poem by Robert Hass, which he discusses with fellow poet Roland Flint, a young man indicates his feelings of attraction for an older woman of a different race. She is receptive to his overtures, but when she offers him a truth about herself, he walks away. Decide for yourself whether his initial declaration would pass or fail the Ewe creativity test.
The young composer working that summer at an artist colony had watched her for a week. She was Japanese, a painter, almost 60, and he thought he was in love with her. He loved her work, and her work was like the way she moved her body, used her hands, looked at him directly when she made amused and considered answers to his questions. One night, walking back from a concert, they came to her door, and she turned to him and said, "I think you would like to have me. I would like that too, but I must tell you that I've had a double mastectomy. And when he didn't understand, I've lost both my breasts." The radiance that he'd carried around in his belly and chest cavity, like music, withered very quickly, and he made himself look at her when he said, "I'm sorry, I don't think I could." He walked back to his own cabin through the pines, and in the morning, he found a small blue bowl on the porch outside his door. It looked to be full of rose petals, but he found, when he picked it up, that the rose petals were on top. The rest of the bowl, she must have swept them from the corners of her studio, was full of dead bees.
I think the ending has one of my favorite effects in recent poetry. It reminds me of something Randall Jarrell says about Frost's design, that it's an unmistakable effect. Or so I thought at first. My first response was, she's saying to him in this eloquent way, when you looked at me, you thought I was all rose petals. And then you found out this fact of my surgery, and I became all dead bees to you. And it was about 2 days later when I had this other perception, and it filled me with a radiance like music to think it. She's also saying, your young man's attraction to me was such a pleasure to me at my age, across cultures and art forms. I thought you were all rose petals, but now I find out you're dead bees. I was moved by that.
I was talking this morning to some high school students in Columbia, and they were asking me what it meant, and of course I avoided the question, saying truthfully that I didn't think about it. I thought about the rhythm of the phrasing of it, and the student said, well, that's interesting, but I'd like to point out that bees pollinate flowers.
The bowl of rose petals and dead bees is a powerful symbol of a failure to flower. Perhaps the extreme in intuitive knowledge is to be found among the mystics in all religions. Despite their doctrinal disagreements, they have much more in common with each other than they have with fellow believers who are more logical or empirical. Mystics are certain that they've had direct experience of the ultimate. They may call what they've encountered God or reality or some other specific name, but mystical experiences across cultures and centuries are remarkably similar. There's a falling away of the world of ordinary experience, a feeling of terror as ego boundaries disappear, and a fascination with something awesome. Finally, there may be the bliss of union with something or someone vast and mysterious. In 14th century Italy, Catherine of Siena had this experience nearly every day for 4 years. After receiving Holy Communion, she went into a trance-like state and spoke to God in a voice very unlike her ordinary one. Priests who heard her wrote down her words, so they've been preserved for us. The most important outcome, however, is that Catherine became bold to speak with popes about God's will for the Church. It was always clear that she spoke not on her own authority, but with God as her guarantor. She was merely the messenger, the carrier of God's words and will. Catherine tried to make peace between Pope Gregory XI and the city of Florence, and went so far as to criticize the Pope for being more concerned with political power than his spiritual obligations. This would have been a very dangerous path for anyone who acted as an individual, and could have led to silence, prison, or even death. Catherine kept her life and freedom because she convinced many people, including the Pope, that she spoke the truth. One thing that greatly aided her truth claim was that while at prayer she acquired nail wounds in her hands and feet like those experienced by Christ on the cross. Called the stigmata, or marks, these wounds were believed to appear only on the bodies of very holy people, those very close to God. Catherine of Siena was eventually named a doctor of the Church, making her one of only 2 women to be awarded this mark of authority. The other is Teresa of Avila, whom we see depicted here in an ecstatic trance. What Bernini the sculptor is showing us is the melting away of the ordinary self and the blissful union with another that Catherine and Teresa, as well as many others, have experienced. The look on her face is also quite similar to that of someone experiencing sexual ecstasy. In both cases, there is a loss of awareness of the everyday world and a union with someone or something beyond the self. At moments of ecstasy, we seem unconcerned that our narrow ego boundaries have disappeared. We are out of ourselves and in another realm. Mystics who had this kind of union with God brought back a powerful truth claim. With God as a kind of ultimate warranty, who would argue with what you have to say? Only someone who rejected the idea of God or the authenticity of your experience. Because powerful church leaders had accepted both the reality of God and the credibility of Catherine and Teresa, these 2 women have been extremely influential in their own time and in our own. Sometimes the you that is usually in charge may disappear altogether. From Asia, we have the concept of beginner's mind, and from Africa, the creativity test that suggests we plant the truth to see if it will grow. Both these approaches seem far from syllogisms and scientific experiments. Even more removed from ordinary life are the trances and truth claims of mystics from around the world. In the search for truth, many cultures have found beauty a valuable starting point, and the artist can become a kind of medium through which truth becomes visible. Our philosophical journey takes us next to the world of art and beauty, what philosophers call aesthetic experience.
Where do you want to go?
I am going to UCLA Med School.
Where do you want to go?
The Great Barrier Reef.
Where do you want to go?
I want to go beyond the imagination.
At Orange Coast College, we offer small class sizes, more than 130 career programs, and university transfer programs to help prepare you for success. Wherever you want to go, we'll help you get there. Call Orange Coast College today.
Hello, I'm Ed Arnold.
And I'm Ann Police.
Stay tuned for Real Orange for the latest news about Orange County issues and events.
It's coming up next on KOCE, your PBS.
For nearly 20 years, the American Health Journal, with your host Roger Cooper, has presented interesting and educational healthcare stories. From an informative tour of a local medical school to an exclusive in-depth interview with an internationally known Nobel Prize winner in medicine. Each week, we explain the latest in medical research and what you and your family can do to prevent disease. So if it's important to you, you'll see it on the American Health Journal.
When surfing was introduced in Orange County in the early 20th century, it was little more than a novelty. Brought to Southern California from Hawaii by legendary surfers such as Duke Kahanamoku and George Freeth, the sport was slow in gaining popularity. For one thing, surfers of that era had to build their own boards, which were considerably larger and heavier than today's boards. Often they were made of solid redwood. By the late 1930s, there were fewer than 100 surfers in all of Orange County. What they lacked in numbers, however, they more than made up for in enthusiasm and sheer love of the sport. Some of their favorite haunts were Huntington Beach, where they tossed bodyboards into the surf from the city pier, Dana Cove, which was lightly settled at that time, and San Onofre to the south. One pioneer Orange County surfer, Ron Drummond, became famous for surfing in a canoe. Toward dusk, the early surfers would often gather on the beach and make their own music, which, like surfing itself, had a strong Hawaiian accent.
El Dia de los Muertos, a time for remembering and a time for celebrating. But what is this holiday really about? KOCE gives you a closer look at this celebration of family and life. Watch Day of the Dead, Sunday at 5:30 on KOCE. It's new, improved, and easy to use. It's www.koce.org. Blanco is back. Last year, KOCE displayed over 100 pieces of Blanco's beautiful hand-blown glass in our studio. This year, we're displaying twice as many of these uniquely crafted dishes, vases, and other works of art. And of course, Richard Blanco will be here to personally sign any gift you may wish to bring home with you. Admission is free, so don't let these pieces collect dust. Come to our studio in Huntington Beach, Sunday, November 12th from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Visit koce.org for more details or call 714-895-5623. Time to cast your ballots. Election time is here, and Real Orange is once again presenting a live election coverage special. We'll bring you constantly updated results on all the measures, propositions, and major candidates of this election season as they come in. And we'll get commentary from leaders on both sides of the aisle. With so much to see, you won't want to miss this Real Orange election special. Starting at 6:30, November 7th on KOCE. Expand your mind with Orange County Public Television, KOCE, and KOCE-DT Digital Television.
Is truth beauty and beauty truth? The English Romantic poet John Keats thought so. In this lesson, we'll try to discover what contact with the beautiful can teach us about truth, and how aesthetic experience can be a kind of knowing. Brushes with death tend to clarify experience for us. Walking away from the bent frame of an automobile or a burning house, you may suddenly understand what's most important to you and what's not worth getting upset over. Art can have a similar effect. Sometimes a gifted artist can take us straight to the heart of reality and give us a glimpse of the way things are that goes beyond the power of words to express. In fact, that's one benefit we can gain from visual art that's less easy to achieve from language: direct, intuitive understanding of what is. There are many things impossible to speak: how you feel about someone you love, the fragility of life, the emotional impact of a gorgeous sunset. Like the experience of mystics we discussed in an earlier lesson, the meaning of our lives may at times seem ineffable, unable to be spoken in words. Poets have the ability to capture those experiences for us. Here, Stanley Kunitz describes his decision to seek the heroic in the everyday. His sense of calling as a poet is expressed in the poem An Old Cracked Tune.
I seek to work with deliberately domestic materials because I felt at the age of military heroes, the famous adventurers, that was no longer with us, that the heroism to celebrate belonged in the home, in the workplace, and that domestic heroism deserved as much attention from the poetic imagination as the heroism in wars and in other such adventures. So, not that I rationalize it in that way, but this is my afterthought about it. And I was also concerned with the sense that the poet in our society is at best a marginal creature outside the mainstream and the primary American myth which pertains to success and power. The poet, in that sense, remains marginal, which does not mean that he is not concerned with central materials, materials that should be central in a different age. So that's some of the afterthoughts about this poem. Because when I was writing it, all I was concerned with was the little details that you do not think of in relation to their interpretation. And if you did, you would never write the poem.
Write it all.
An old crack tune. My name is Solomon Levi. The desert is my home. My mother's breast was thorny, and father I had none. The sands whispered, be separate. The stones taught me, be hard. I dance for the joy of surviving on the edge of the road.
Poets can be our guides through the tangled webs of our own lives, helping us discover meaning in the ordinary and the painful. Even if we find ourselves unable to speak about something with words, we shouldn't assume it's irrational or that it can't be communicated. American philosopher Suzanne Langer contends that art is a very appropriate medium for the life of feeling and emotion. It serves as the translator of inward experience in the same way that words translate outward experience. In a very important sense, the arts we come in contact with teach us how to feel, and this includes the so-called fine art on museum walls, as well as TV, popular music, and advertising jingles. Under ideal circumstances, when an artist apprehends a truth about reality, the work of art that follows expresses that truth. Even if we're not creative artists ourselves, we have access to what the artist learned because he or she has left it for us to read in the art object. Great art always seems to point beyond itself to the source of its vision. This is intuitive knowing that moves beyond the personal and creates a connection between artist and audience. Listen as writer John McGahern describes for Terry Winch the process of novelist sharing with reader.
Primarily a writer writes out of his private world, which is always spiritual. And I think nothing survives in a way that hasn't a quality of life or of the spirit. And I think that each of us has a private world within ourselves, and it's a world that others cannot see. And that the only difference between the reader and the writer is that that the writer has a talent like somebody who can sing or paint, and he can actually dramatize that his own private world, which is the opposite of autobiography, because it's actually a world shaped according to an order and a plan, which would be nice if life was according to that, but it's a series of accidents. And I think that each person, when he reads a book, actually reads it with the same private world that the writer writes out of. And I actually think that I never know how a book is going to turn out when I begin it, and I have a feeling that if I wasn't setting out again on a beginning and on a discovery, is that there'd be no excitement for the reader to find out either. And somehow you can't fake that tension that's in the prose, even though the arrangement of the words may not be very different, because change the words and you actually change the whole stress of the meaning. But I do think that I really dislike the notion of the artist as hero. I much prefer the notion of the artist as clerk. And I think Ibsen in the 19th century and the biographies of Mr. James Joyce has a lot to answer for. Because I think that there's no difference except in talent between the writer and the reader. And in fact, a book is a dead thing until it comes to life in a reader's mind. And if you have 1,000 readers for the same book, you're going to have 1,000 different books.
Opening his or her private spiritual world, the artist enlarges the reader's life. Artists often speak of being chosen for their work, of having no choice but to do what they do. Many understand their work to be engaging the big questions of life, the same imponderables that philosophers struggle to understand. Not willing to live life on the surface, a painter, sculptor, novelist, or poet may feel unable to leave the cosmic riddles alone, even if he or she feels personally unworthy to attempt so huge a task. American poet Robert Hass has translated the work of the Polish writer Czesław Miłosz and gives us a flavor of this dilemma in Miłosz's poem, A Confession.
My Lord, I love strawberry jam and the dark sweetness of a woman's body, also well-chilled vodka, herring and olive oil, scents of cinnamon, of clove. So what kind of prophet am I? Why should the Spirit have visited such a man? Many others were justly called and trustworthy. Who would have trusted me? For they saw how I empty glasses, throw myself on food, glance greedily at the waitress's neck, flawed and aware of it, desiring greatness, able to recognize greatness wherever it is, and yet not quite, only in part, clairvoyant. I knew what was left for smaller men like me, a feast of brief hopes, a rally for the proud, a tournament of hunchbacks, literature.
Now let's look at some examples of how the artist works. A Taoist story tells of King the Master Carver, who made a bell stand of such beauty that all who saw it were amazed. Some thought it must be the work of spirits. When pressed, King insisted there was no secret. First, he fasted until all other concerns, even the approval of his patron, faded away. Then, in this focused state, he went into the woods to find the raw material. When he saw the perfect tree, the bell stand was already present in it. The Renaissance sculptor Michelangelo described the creation of this statue of the biblical David, about to throw the stone that will kill the giant Goliath, in almost the same words. Once he found the right piece of marble, the one with the David already in it, Michelangelo said, it was just a question of chiseling away what didn't belong. Chinua Achebe's novel Arrow of God tells a similar story of Adogo, the carver of ritual masks. After entering his sacred space and taking the tools in hand, he goes fully into his work. The mask is beginning to emerge from the wood when an overheard conversation breaks his concentration. In a sense, the artist is a medium as well as an independent actor. Something seems to be going on for which the artist is a translator rather than an originator. To carve a mask that will enable a god to appear at a ritual celebration is to be a kind of priest, standing between eternal and earthly things and communicating back and forth. Whether or not the content is specifically religious, there is often the sense that an artist touches the heart of reality and leaves a glimpse of it for us. As Lee Young Lee explains to fellow poet Michael Collier, the art of writing involves getting beyond one's personal story in order to hear and speak a more universal one.
It's both, I know, a richness and a resource for me, and yet I know that it's a hindrance for me because I know I need to get beyond my personal history to hear a greater impersonal voice, an anonymous voice, you know. And I really wanted to hear that voice, and I knew that one of the ways I would be able to do that is to get past the personal history, and the only way I could do that was to write it.
The writer engages the reader in a process. To produce the bell stand, the David, the ritual mask, the poem, the artist must move beyond a narrow personal identity and enter a focused state of intuitive knowing. From it, a deeper, fuller glimpse of reality is often possible. Each of these works of art can speak to the culture that produced it, about the human person and his or her connection with eternal things. Across miles and centuries, we too can look at art objects and share a glimpse of that expanded reality. So an artist must be careful to avoid a too small container. In writing his personal memoir, A Winged Seed, Lee Young Lee was concerned to find a form large enough to contain everything he might wish to say.
You know, I guess ultimately, Michael, what I wanted to write was a long, you know, a very late 20th century ambition to write a long, personal American epic, you know. And I thought to myself, well, it would have to be very big, you know, because, I mean, I'd read Homer, I know what an epic was, and I love the Old and New Testaments, you know.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, you know, those are things to shoot for. So primarily I thought to myself, it would have to be like, well, the Bible, you know. It would have to enact, it would have to be yogic. That is, the reading of the book would have to adjust the reader, you know. It would have to try to enact a kind of union with our manifold self, you know, with other states of consciousnesses, and it would have to have praise in it. It would have to have. See, I don't mean to get too esoteric here, but you know, like in the New Testament, my love for it has brought me to read it over and over again, and I noticed that in the Gospels, we can basically break it down into the narrative and in the saying, you know. We have the stories of this man named Jesus, and we have the things that he said. And sometimes the narrative seems more pregnant. Sometimes the sayings seem more pregnant, you know. So I knew that this book would have to be, it would have to be narrative and saying, you know, and so it would have to be both of them. It would have to have the extremes of song and praise. And I just wanted a form that I could just throw everything in and see what would happen. You know?
Perhaps every life, if seen accurately, is as large and full as the entire human experience. At a symposium held in 416 BCE, Socrates told of instructions he'd received from the priestess Diotima concerning eros, or earthly love, as a connecting link between the human and the divine. We begin, Socrates said, with platonic love, a search for truth and beauty undertaken by two people who share mutual affection. In ancient Greece, this kind of love would typically involve two men. From love of one beautiful body, one can move to the love of all physical beauty, then to the love of a beautiful soul, even if housed in a less than beautiful body, then to the contemplation of beauty as it exists in science, thought, and the moral law, and finally to the love of beauty itself. For poet Stanley Kunitz, a poem has the power to bring this sense of beauty into ordinary life, to transform the everyday into the legendary by focusing intently on detail and getting it right.
The problem with the life is that it is so transient and in so many respects so meaningless against the great panorama of history and the cosmos itself. We are such small creatures. And one of the destinations of the poem, or the aspirations of the poem, is to make that life important, to justify the existence, to magnify what has happened to us so that it becomes for others emblematic, or in the other term, legendary. The work of the poet in our time is to make ordinary experience beautiful in the grand sense, not in the pretty sense. Beautiful, mysterious, and terrible.
To convert life into legend is to merge the temporal with the eternal. Plato and Aristotle agreed that the purpose of art is mimesis, or a representation of reality, and they disagreed about its value for us humans. This painting is a perfect copy of a photograph, and so we assume a very accurate image of the person who sat for the portrait. We might describe this painting as coming very close to the real thing, but Plato would disagree, believing that the most real things existed in pristine or perfect form in another world. Plato mistrusted the senses as distorters of reality and viewed artists as dangerous workers of illusion. If the real bed is in the kingdom of ideas, the imperfect copy the carpenter makes is once removed from it, and the bed the artist paints is 2 times removed. Who would be interested in a copy of a copy when the real thing is available for contemplation by the mind? Aristotle, who was convinced the perfect forms exist in this ordinary world, in things or nowhere, thought art could teach valuable lessons. The tragedies of the Athenian playwrights seemed to him especially important voices to hear. When the citizens of Athens gathered in an outdoor amphitheater to see one of these dramas, the whole polis was assembled, rich and poor, young and old, watching the out-of-control emotions of a character on the stage, and the predictable tragedy that follows would offer the audience a cleansing or catharsis. Seeing Medea kill her children to hurt Jason, the husband who abandoned her for another woman, the audience would have their own pity, excited and resolved by identifying with the heroine. This vicarious experience, so much safer than the real thing, could serve as a safety valve and leave the audience as purified emotionally as a bath leaves the body clean physically. Jungian psychology finds works of aesthetic creativity similarly revelatory and useful in understanding the human condition. As Karina Golden explains, the arts can offer us windows into the unconscious.
I think one thing that's very important for us to acknowledge is the role of the artist in our society. The artist helps us to be in touch with the unconscious, helps us to understand those aspects of ourselves that are in shadow, those parts of ourselves that we don't normally acknowledge. And when I say that, I say artists who create works of beauty as well as those who create works in popular culture that help us to get a sense of what's going on in the unconscious of us as a society that might not be very pretty for us to look at. So in popular culture, we see that violence is something that people watch on television, something that people see in the movies. People seem to like that. Well, that's giving us a message about what's going on in our unconscious as a culture. And I think we need to pay attention to those messages, as well as the messages that can be given to us through, great works of beauty, through the expression of poets, through dance, through music. I think that sometimes we forget that the artist is, in many countries, has been a person who has been persecuted for expressing the truth. There are many musicians and poets who are exiled from their homelands because of what they expressed through art that really was an expression of inner truths that people did not want to acknowledge and did not want to face. So the arts play a very, very important role in our understanding of what's really going on in the unconscious.
In the hustle and bustle of our ordinary lives, we can miss these insights into a larger reality. The arts bring us back and reconnect us with what really matters. Art offers us an alternate route to truth. With the artist as an intermediary, we can catch a glimpse of eternal truths, or of ordinary reality as we've never seen it before. What cannot be said in words can often be conveyed in images, and the apparent chaos of our inner life of feeling and emotion can be translated by a skillful artist who has been where we'd like to go. Whether we choose to play the role of artist ourselves or observe the work of others, art has the power to reveal and communicate on an intuitive level. Beauty, it seems, can lead to truth. Art and the aesthetic experience have the added benefit of revealing to us what we truly value. And as we'll see in the next lesson, art has the power to help us see the world differently, to alter our very way of knowing.